to thank Drs. King and Rain for joining us again, as well as my colleagues on the board and our board members elect. And I think Mr. Pruitt was going to be joining us maybe. But it is 6:06. Well, okay. And Mr. Pruitt, it's 6:06. We'll go ahead and Dr. Thomas. At 6:06, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Dr. Thomas, if you would conduct roll call for us.
Yes, ma'am. We have Mr. Davis.
Here.
Mr. Stevens.
Here.
Ms. Davis.
Here.
Dr. Yeager.
Here.
Dr. Dykeman.
Here.
Mr. Worthy. Mr. Worthy.
Here.
Okay. Dr. Knox.
Here.
Dr. Gant.
Here.
And Dr. Maddox.
Here.
Great, thank you. So all of our current board members are present. We're going to move forward with item number 2, which is to amend or adopt the agenda. The floor is open.
I so move.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Ms. Davis. Was that
Second.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Davis provided the second. Are there any questions or discussion? All right. Dr. Thomas, if you would take roll for all in favor of adopting our
Yes,
current
ma'am.
agenda.
I'm sorry, there's a feedback.
Okay.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
Ms. Davis.
Yes.
Dr. Yeager.
Yes.
Dr. Dykeman.
Yes.
Mr. Worthy.
Yes.
Dr. Knox.
Yes.
Dr. Gant.
Yes.
Dr. Maddox.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you. We are at item 3 of our discussion, which is a continuation of our self-assessment. Drs. King and Rain are here to continue facilitating that conversation. And so I am going to turn the floor over to them.
Thank you, Chairman Gant, members of the board, Dr. Thomas, and guests. We have the plan. We're happy to be with you this afternoon, going into the evening, and are looking forward to continuing the discussion of your self-assessment. Just a quick recap. Of course, we, during the initial portion of this, we had the opportunity to walk through 3 domains from your self-assessment. Those domains consisted of personnel, which is domain number 6. We also discussed your results related to domain 8, which is ethics, and continued into board and community relations, which is domain number 3. Tonight, we will move forward with the intentions of completing the 5 domains in terms of where you are. 2 things I would remind the governance team of would be, as we go into your results, you want to think about implications for those results in terms of governance team improvement and capturing any goals that you would like to capture as a result of the analysis. That's one piece, and you want to begin the documentation of what those goals may look like in terms of improvement. Secondly, you want to also parallel those results with any necessary documentation related to the work that you're doing related to the Cognia report. So those will be the 2 things that we will work with you to support you to hone in on how you want to move forward with those 2 items. So the five domains that will remain for tonight. First, we will talk about your results related to strategic planning, followed by board meetings, policy development, financial governance, and the last domain will be actually domain number one, which is board governance. We will conclude with that particular domain. So first, domain for tonight will be strategic planning, which is actually domain number two. I'll pause there and defer to Julie to make some opening comments as well.
Thank you, Sam. It's good to be back with you guys to try to finish this up. You know, we did hit board governance a good bit, but I don't think we finished it. So what we're doing tonight is we're starting with, you know, the worst ranked in order. So strategic planning, it had 7 out of 10 needs improvement. So we're going to start there and work our way down to meetings and policy and finances. And then we'll go back to domain one if there's time. Hopefully there will be. So any comments or questions before we begin? Okay, great. So domain two, strategic planning. The main description is a governance team in collaboration with the community adopts and enacts a planning process that results in an adopted system strategic plan designed to improve student achievement and organizational effectiveness. And there are 2 standards for this one. And the first standard is the governance leadership team provides input to and adopts the system strategic plan. And you can see the 3 elements there that we try to abide by. And then standard B, annually and as needed, utilizing the adopted strategic planning process, the governance leadership team monitors and reports progress on performance measures. And that one has 4 elements. And you gave yourselves 2 satisfactory, 7 needs improvement, and 1 didn't know. And so to summarize the comments, it seems as though it's difficult for the board to focus on strategic plan because of prior board leadership not focusing on it enough, especially in meetings. Comments this is one of the most serious areas of needed improvement, but the interim superintendent and her team are in the process of developing a new strategic plan, and the board was involved in the planning retreat for this, which is great. There's a strong resistance to governing by the strategic plan, perhaps because we typically tried to do these in conjunction with the superintendent's mid-year and end of the year evaluation. So instead of always adhering to the strategic plan, it was mainly focused on the eval for your superintendent. Let's see, over the past year, this process has been impacted. However, recent work is being done to review the plan and seems to be the most important areas of collaboration between the board, superintendent, district staff, and stakeholders in the community. And it looks like the board has adopted a more streamlined strategic 2-year plan that addresses the need to involve LSGTs more effectively and draws upon the strengths of the school system staff. So that's it in a nutshell from your comments. And I didn't see really anything specific in the Cogni report. Sam, did you see anything? I don't recall anything.
No, based on our review, as we mentioned in the opening, we want to accomplish 2 things, or help you accomplish 2 things. One would be to ensure that you make necessary steps as a result of your analysis based on the self-assessment. Anything from your results that also would have implications for your cognitive report, we want to point those things out. Our review indicated that it does not indicate that you have directives related to the strategic plan. So as far as capturing information there's no directive that we see. If you decide to add that because you think it directly or indirectly relates to anything that's there in the report, you can do so. However, we feel that this one is of course important. The strategic plan drives everything that you do as an organization, and it leads and guides all of that, even the building of your agenda, all of that. It is the lifeblood of your work. So the fact that you indicated 7 out of 10 that you needed improvement, um, you need to reflect to see if you think you're making those steps. And so, Julie, I would ask if you would arrow back up on your page, in the page sharing, to that first standard where it says um, you provide input, that the governance leadership team provides input to and adopts the system strategic plan. And the reason I wanted to come back to this, because you mentioned that you all are in the process of adopting a new strategic plan. So you have had the opportunity to begin to be involved in all of these elements that you see on the screen, because it talks about collaboration, it talks about involving the community, it talks about what that means, because the developing your priorities, your beliefs, your vision, your mission, all of that is reflective of joint involvement of the board and superintendent and her administration, etc. So, and if you see that particular element number 1, you see element number 2 where it speaks to um, reviewing. Governance leadership team reviews, assesses the system strategic plan, and the board readopts. So you need to think about that in your process to ensure that as you are adopting a new strategic plan, you want to capture a process that will ensure that you are at least annually taking a look at how you're monitoring. However, it is strongly recommended that you do that from what we call a formative standpoint. So more than just annually, because the reports that your superintendent and her team bring to you during your meetings, work sessions, etc., are ideally aligned with your strategic plan. So as that happens and you receive reports, that's a process of monitoring. What we don't know, and I'm going to pause in a moment and have you think about this, because what we don't know would be how you're doing that and what plans you're making to do that. The next item 3, element 3, leadership team conducts a strategic planning process consistent with ethics, of course. Then it gets into standard B, which utilizing the adopted strategic planning process, the team monitors and reports progress, which is what I just mentioned. So I'll pause there. Julie, anything to add before we listen to governance team members?
No, I was just curious because it wasn't mentioned in the comments about, if y'all have a balanced scorecard that you update at a retreat every year, or if there's any kind of update to the plan that's the existing plan in your meetings. And I'm not sure if your board agenda items are tied to your current strategic plan. So I was curious about the answers to those questions. That's all.
If I could speak just for a moment. When we first started, I guess in 2018, Dr. Means had began the process of revising the strategic plan, and we had a large community group of stakeholders. Board members were involved in the process. We had facilitators that came in and worked with us from out of our area, and they worked to help us develop the strategic plan. We also developed a district scorecard, and the plan had been for there to be quarterly reporting out on those indicators. We made a good bit of changes throughout, and so that information was not gathered as consistently as it needed to be. We also found that the strategic plan, while it was valuable, the language in it was such that it was difficult for all of those who are partners in this work to truly grasp what it is that we were trying to do. What were our true goals? How did they fit into that? What were our indicators? And so what we're doing now, we are not creating a new strategic plan. We're taking the current plan and revising it, attempting to just change the language somewhat where it's more easily understood by a layperson and people who are really responsible. So rather than having a lot of the technical jargon and language in there, we're trying to make it something that you could walk into a teacher's classroom and ask them, what is it you're trying to do? So if our overall goal is college and career readiness, the first, if that's our priority, the first goal under that is that all third graders will be reading on grade level. That's pretty simple, right? And so if you go into a kindergarten classroom, they should be able to talk about their work that's leading to that first goal. And so we are trying to simplify. So taking what we had, I felt that in light of the pandemic and administrative changes and so many other uncertainties, we did not want to drastically change the plan, but we did want to make the plan more user-friendly. So that's kind of where we are now. We're going to present that plan to the board in October. And then we have committed to having that on our board agenda for regular, at a minimum, quarterly updates on our progress and sharing that scorecard.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. So it sounds as if from the first standard, which is not on the screen now, you see standard B, but I just want to mention the first one because that one relates to you actually receiving input and involving your stakeholders and then adopting your strategic plan, which is a living, breathing document related to the needs of your organization. What I hear you saying is that you have gone through a process of reviewing and revising your current strategic plan to reflect the needs of your organization aligned to what your strengths and weaknesses are. So it sounds as if you have begun to take care of elements 1, 2, and 3 of standard A, because that's what that really that speaks to those things. Now, I'm saying this because I'm prodding you a little bit to think, because after, if I'm wrong, then don't allow us to move on to B if you feel as if you have not done that. Okay.
I'm going to say that, you know, I hear that we're going to get this presentation in October, and we've had kind of a preview of the way the strategic plan is going to evolve, because we're making equity the underlying theme across all indicators, is what I understood from our last conversation with this. When it comes down to validating or verifying that way of thinking, I guess, with the community, I don't know what community collaboration was engaged in looking at this new direction, or is that going to come after the presentation to the board? And I say presentation because, you know, I get a little bit nervous about handing things over the fence, like district did this and we want you to look at it and then give us some feedback and then we throw it back over the fence. And that seems like it's going to take us a little bit of time to do that. And I'm looking for a more collaborative way to get to the same thing. And again, in my history, I just spent a lot of time working on these. In my corporate environment, it was the work to make sure that we had that alignment constantly. And it just seemed to work better if we were actually doing some things together to get us there. And again, the measurements and how these things are achieved, they're definitely, I get that. That's Dr. Thomas's domain 100%. And the only thing I think the board would have to do is say, yeah, well, that meets the requirement that we have for, you know, whatever this particular goal is in that plan. But part of our learning process and the buy-in on this, it really can be put into a system, if you will. And when I say put into a system, such that everything is framed in relationship to the strategic plan. And so my experience on the board has been when things on our agenda were presented to us, there was an indicator of which initiative it was under and which goal it would be measuring or contributing to in terms of measurements. And that was just the way information was presented to the board, especially things that we had to vote on. And I haven't seen that commitment in things recently.
So they're not tied to your action items in your board meetings currently.
They may be. I'm just not seeing those boxes on a piece of paper on that presentation itself or on the recommendation itself being checked off. And so I think we specifically developed that instrument so that we could stay focused and aligned with what we said we were doing.
So it sounds like you're concerned that the community input sessions that happened back in 2018 might not, people might not remember that, or they might not feel in touch with it currently.
Well, not just people, the board in general. I mean, if we're 7 out of 9 saying we need more work on this, I'm not sure that the message is clear to the board anymore of what was discussed and agreed upon through that process in 2018 when we did have the community engagement, and then that was brought back to the board. And then the superintendent took it to his cabinet and the department heads, and they came up with the specific measures that we would use to evaluate performance against the strategic plan. And that was the final product presented to us. And it was after it had been vetted. We started it, and then it was vetted and built upon by the community, by the staff, and then brought back to say, this is how we want to march. Is this the direction? And then from that point, we were looking each month at things presented to the board from that lens.
I see.
So if I could follow up. So Linda, you're saying that in our board agenda, we used to have items that were specifically linked to certain parts of the strategic plan, but now we don't? Is that?
I'm just not seeing that same format is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
I'm not saying that it's not linked. I'm saying I'm not seeing that format,
Okay.
which would be the thing that would validate that,
Right.
yes, we have laid this against the strategic plan, and it makes telling the story a lot easier, and it sets expectations
Okay.
for me a lot better.
Well,
Okay,
you used to have the assembly module with that in it, and I believe y'all did do that then. And then with board docs, I believe you can still do that, but I don't know. So
We
maybe that's
certainly, yeah.
Well,
what happened as to why they're not tied together.
yeah, I see it. I was just looking at our latest meeting and agenda and looking at some consent agenda items. Underneath the recommended action, there's something that stated goals, and it says priority number 4, fiscal health, which
Right.
I assume that's from the strategic plan.
is.
So
That's the item. I'm looking at some here too.
So
That's
some of them have it, all of them don't, is all I'm
Okay.
saying.
okay.
Okay, so it
I
could,
guess it
Ms. Linda,
depends
was
if it's,
this, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Dr. Thomas.
Yeah, what you're speaking of, is this before we joined the board? What you're talking about, it may be because of the assembly, that might be what it is.
No,
Because I'm not familiar with that, format.
no, it wasn't. This was all of 19, and it kind of goes along with that binder that we had on governance too. So everything in there kind of linked back to the strategic plan as well, when the agenda items were set.
so
So it was a system that was put in place.
I'm looking at the September 10th agenda, the consent agenda, and
Mhm.
and like on there where there was, trying to see what the action item was. It was about amendment to the budget, and then
Right.
there's a fiscal impact, and then it tells what goal, and that it's priority number 4, fiscal health. So I think, Dr. Maddox, that's the document where we have public content on there. Above that, we usually list what priority area that item aligns to.
Thank you.
Right.
So we need to make sure that that's done consistently. And we also need to make sure that, again, I want to engage community and get input, but I also don't want to make a drastic change to the strategic plan at this point in leadership. So trying to balance that. And the one change that Ms. Davis mentioned was, having equity and that shift. And that is something that we want to meet with the community about as well. Again, we're also so limited with current conditions and how we're able to do things that we have historically done in the past. We have
Right.
this with different stakeholder groups via Zoom and just gotten input that way with the board, but also with other groups to get their input, but not necessarily in the same manner that it was done pre-COVID.
I'm fine with that. Again, I think that the most important thing is for us not to get, 7 months into a plan and we don't have the community support for what we're doing, or we're missing a direction that the community is trying to send us in, and we're not, aware of that. So that's my concern. And then the other part of that is simply just the mechanics of keeping up with all of it so that we can stay focused.
Yes.
Okay,
Well, I will
so
say, I appreciate the way that, that Dr. Thomas, simplified, and the way that she's beginning to simplify that process. A lot of times as a new board member, I was told to go to the dashboard, everything you need is in this dashboard. It never worked. And, and so now she's simplifying, like she said, so that anybody can be able to pick up the pieces and understand the strategic plan. And so I do appreciate that we're at least going in that direction. I know that we will get to the community, but a lot of that is not going to be so far-fetched from what the community already has. Again, it's as she explained to us, she's, they're trying to simplify it so that she can bring the community and bring everybody in. And I appreciate that. That has helped me a lot.
Comments? It sounds like your system beliefs, your vision, your mission, and your overarching goals have not changed. Is that correct assumption?
That's correct.
And
That's
that was
mine.
going to be, sorry, my question was going to be, given that this strategic plan is really more of sort of a review and revision, would you think that it is something that would require the same level of community collaboration, or not? Like as developing a new strategic plan? I was asking Dr. Raymond, Dr. King.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, you definitely want to, since you're revisiting it and there has been some changes and equity is going to be more at the forefront of this new plan, I would certainly recommend that you re-engage, but probably not to the same level as developing it from the ground up. You just want to go back and reshare the vision and mission and your overarching goals and how you've made the changes that you're going to be looking at for the next, 2 years? Is that how long it's going to be? The new plan is going to be a 2-year plan?
Yes, ma'am. We were just really trying to extend the plan. And so our thinking, and I totally understand what Ms. Davis is saying and getting community buy-in. Our thinking was that we were taking what was already there from the community and the input that we had already received and just trying to simplify what we had rather than starting with ground zero. Because before it was almost a year-long process that we went through to do that well. And I honestly don't feel like we have that kind of time right now to be absent of some type of guide for our work. I do appreciate how Ms. Davis always pushes us, at the meetings, well, how does this align to the plan? How does this align to the plan? But right now, the plan is just so challenging in some areas. It's hard to articulate that. And so my plan had not been to go through that full process of having different groups coming in, because again, it was a year-long to do that well. So we were not planning to do that at that level. We were planning to share this with community groups, get feedback from community groups, but we were taking essentially the plan we already had and just trying to make it something that was easier to follow rather than doing the full strategic planning process at this point. I feel like a new superintendent's going to come in. They're going to have goals and ideas. We have new board members that will be working with that new superintendent. And I did not want to commit a year to doing that kind of work that could be totally different than where a direction someone else was going in. And when we have a plan that is fairly sustainable, we just need to get it in a way where people understand what they're being asked to do.
I totally understand that and think that's wise. And, you know, Ms. Davis is right that the more buy-in you have from the community, the better off it's going to be. So, you know, not to the full level of a new plan, but definitely, like, I think you're already planning to involve the community with the revisions. So as long as they're part of the process, I think you'll be all right.
So I appreciate what Dr. Thomas is saying too, and I fully support not going back to square one on this, because I don't think the community's direction has changed that radically in just 4 years. I think that we have an opportunity to introduce the things that are expedient and appropriate for this time for an interim superintendent, and to just make sure that we are all on that same page in terms of what the priorities are, so that we can manage expectations of the community. Because those measurements are out there, and I don't know if anybody can get to them. I haven't looked at them recently, but I did understand them. And so when we talk about increasing the CCRPI scores and things like that, well, those things have been waived. We're in a whole new world now. So it would make sense that if we have an initiative or an objective on our strategic plan that says this is going to be a governing thing for us, or an objective for the district, if it doesn't apply, then we just simply need to go in and say, okay, this doesn't apply, and here's the new thing that we're going to use to measure or to deliver under this strategic goal. That would be the revision that I would be looking for at this point, to again align ourselves and make sure that we stay focused on those things. Again, I'm from that world where I was looking at an initiative that said we would have a 12% improvement, I believe, in I think it was reading, if I'm not mistaken, and over some period of time. Well, we're not measuring that anymore. So what's driving our work in that area? And if we don't know what's driving the work in the area, does everybody else know what's driving the work in the area? And so then how then are we leading a district if we haven't articulated, you know, what we're trying to get to? So that's why the strategic plan is such a critical piece for me.
And those are those metrics are areas that we have already started revising and that we do plan to share with you, is how are we going to monitor our work with this new way of learning for our kids and many of the other factors that have changed.
So all I'm saying is if we put the expectation out there, tell people how we're going to monitor it, then there's no more distrust, there's no more discomfort. People can actually relax and say either I agree with it or I don't agree with it, but at least they know what it is. And they know that we're all moving in that same direction.
So here's several major items for the governor's team to consider. It sounds as if you are at a point of refresh and revising. You're not at square one, which means that the robust involvement from the community and the stakeholders that's on the front end, and you all took a year or so, a year or X number of months to do that. And now that you're refreshing and or revising, it is certainly not a requirement that you have to take that kind of time and have that type of involvement. However, what you would want to do would be to capture how you are continuing the input from your community. That's one thing. The other piece that I heard you mention was to clarify how you are capturing the alignment of your agenda items with the strategic plan. And it sounds as if you have begun to do some of that, but you would possibly want to consider ensuring that you link or reference on your agenda which priorities or which action steps the agenda item is related to. That's one thing. And the last piece that I mentioned would be just what Dr. Thomas just alluded to, would be also capturing how you plan to monitor and report your updates to the board. And I heard you say that it's going to be more than annually. So it could be nothing more than documenting that you're going to do quarterly reports and updates to the board on progress with your strategic plan. So I would suggest then let's just take a quick look at standard B, and we'll read once again. The first element that relates to the monitoring, we just spoke to that. So I think you're okay unless someone has a question. The second one would be, when I say I think you're okay, as long as you capture what we just said and that you're going to move forward in the spirit that you feel you need to. The second one relates to professional development focused on assessment of the school system strategic plan. An example of that is what you're doing now, but you need to continue that and capture the reports. And the third piece, the third element, number 3 in this section, element section, would be annually and as needed, self-assess performance and fulfilling the duties in supporting and implementing the strategic plan. The last one, the team meets annually to appropriately focus upon the items that are listed below. So take a look at those and think about where you feel you are with that, because those will be in need of you capturing your goals for improvement if you feel you're not where you need to be with this particular piece.
Dr. King, yeah, I mean, I guess I was waiting for that element 1, even though we were talking about it in standard A, but it's specifically listed in standard B, number 1, in terms of the indicators of where we're at in terms of meetings or strategic plan. And one issue that I had, and I'm just speaking for myself, is that at one time we had so many indicators out there that I got bogged down. You know, and it, you know, we talk about just reading scores. There's so many different ways that we were introduced to different indicators in terms of increased reading and that type of thing. I just got bogged down, and so I don't know. It's to me, it was like driving down a highway where, you know, I want a speed limit sign, and I want a line of, you know, tells me if a lane's going to disappear or something like that. But if you give me 40 signs kind of lined up in a row, I start losing focus. And so I guess I'm not sure how. I guess I'm asking y'all to for some feedback in terms of, I mean, can you have too many indicators?
I want to hear you all's response, but that was actually when I was listening to Ms. Davis speak, and I was listening to Dr. Maddox and Dr. Knox. That was one of the main areas that we were looking to change, was the number of indicators. And I think, and I'm trying not to, I don't want to say speak too much because this is an open group, but that was what we ran into, where there was so many things we were trying to measure and keep up with. And our goal is trying to see what specific information, data, metrics will let us know if we're reaching that goal. And and I think part of where we went awry was that there became a perception that every individual, every department had to have a specific metric that directly aligned to them. And I remember Dr. Means and I would have this conversation often, that just because it's not in the plan doesn't mean it's not being done, and it doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. But when we were creating the plan and we started working on the metrics, it almost spiraled out of control, because every group felt like every text that they gave to a student, every measurement they took had to be included in that plan. And it doesn't minimize the importance of that work that they're doing, but it doesn't, in my opinion, and he and I had agreed on this, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the plan. And I think that's where we kind of lost control, and we have so many indicators that it's hard to know what you're actually reporting out to the public. Does that make sense, Julie and Sam?
Absolutely, yes. And, you know, I think you can have too many indicators, and you want to make sure that you prioritize and you don't burn your staff out. But
And
just because if it's not in the plan doesn't mean it's not being measured, like you said.
And-
So you want
and-
to pick the high metrics, whether you do, whether it's CCRPI or MAP testing or, some data points that are as much across the board as possible, that are strategic, and what the outcomes are and how it drives, say, instruction, for instance.
And many times the number of indicators will be determined by the context of your work. For example, if you're looking at, and I'm just pulling something out of there here, if you're looking at elementary level and you're looking at, I think we mentioned this, the percentage of students that are reading on grade level by the end of a certain grade. If that's something that you had as a priority, which really relates to literacy at the early level, that's a priority that the board has, for example, be literacy. The superintendent and her administration would then move forward to develop their action plans to address improving the rate at which children are reading on grade level by the end of a certain grade. And so whatever her team decides that they are going to be doing to meet that priority that you guys outlined in the strategic plan, that would determine indicators, because you've got a baseline, because you know where you are now, because that's what resulted in it being a priority in terms of an improvement item that you wanted to focus around. So whatever that baseline is, your superintendent would then determine, okay, we can commit to X amount of improvement over X period of time, over one school year, over 2 years, 3 years. So then that becomes becomes the indicator that you're utilizing. Then your quarterly reports will relate back to that. For example, her team will be doing something to begin to move forward to close that gap. It could be a program that they adopted that they knew was research based, and over a period of every 10 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks, they were collecting information on how children were improving. Well, at the end of that 8 to 10 weeks, the superintendent at a certain board meeting and a quarterly report will present to you, here's where we were, here's what we've done, and here's how children have progressed based on that. So my point is, it depends on, the context and the content of the work that you're doing, the kind of indicators that are there. And when she reports that, you guys give feedback on it to say, and ask questions, because this is the piece where you defer to your administration to have the expertise and the wisdom to move forward to close the gap. But it is your work to determine that it is a priority. And it is her responsibility to bring forth the information to show how the administration is getting to improvement around that. So, and I do feel that you could have too many indicators, but there are formative indicators that are important in the example that I just gave, because you don't wait until the end of the school year to report on a summative result around literacy, because that team is doing work throughout the entire school year, and she will be and that reports will be made to you around how things are going. So just remember that piece as you move forward with what you're doing.
Yeah, I guess it was when we went to evaluate the superintendent, and we take let's say the reading score indicators. We had every grade level, we had every demographic imaginable broken out. And from a board perspective, in terms of evaluating, it's like I was looking at the individual trees to such a degree. I mean, I know Kara, and that's how I got to know Kara and Patricia so well, because I was calling them up because their minds think more in those terms. And I was seeking help to try to understand, literally looking at hundreds of numbers, some of which were completed, some of which were not, some were up and some were down, which you would expect. You wouldn't, to have everything go up for every demographic of your student body to the same degree isn't realistic. And so, had it been down to, if the equity piece is so central to our strategic plan, then that's, if I'm looking at third grade reading levels, then I want to see the equity piece in that. That part of our strategic plan because that's front and center. But I'm not sure that, I mean, there's, if something goes up or something goes down, then it would seem like, then we would ask the superintendent and her staff, why did, you know, the third grade reading scores at this particular school go down? I mean, let's tease it out a little bit more for me. Was it students with special needs? They may find that's the point. And so they would bring that forward and say, that's our challenge, is that this particular school, students with special needs are not reading on grade level and they're actually falling behind. But it didn't seem like it was something I needed to know as a board member right up front. You know, what is the reading level of all the schools in the third grade who are special needs students? And yet, I mean, I was given that information and some people on the board loved it to death. But from a board perspective, just as myself, it just lost me. It just lost me.
Well, and you know, that's the strength of boards is you have so many different types of learners and consumers of information that, you know, some people really like to dig deep into the data and some don't. You know, you just want the bottom line. We did map testing, and so I loved digging into those subgroups to find out how a third grade special needs female student did against other third grade female special needs students internationally, you know, to see how much they had progressed from one testing time to the next. We did it 3 times a year, but I loved that. You might not need that, you know, and that's okay. So it sounds like Dr. Thomas's understanding of where all that information is coming from, it's going to be a bit more streamlined, so that hopefully you're just going to get most of the strategic goals on a quarterly basis.
Julie,
Yes.
I can really appreciate what you said a few minutes ago, digging into the data. When you look at overall data, and when you said digging in, something just popped in my head. I used to do it all the time. Disaggregating the data. You can get a far clearer picture of actually what's going on when you start disaggregating the data.
Yes, you can. And given your background, I know you used to do that a lot, I'm sure.
Oh, yes.
But I'll also say that, you know, even in the short tenure that we had, all of these numbers and these metrics, we ran across one of our strategic initiatives that was driving a behavior that Dr. Means felt like we needed to go back and revisit that particular initiative, because the way we were measuring it was causing people to do something that we didn't want to happen. And so that was one of those that was on the list for us to revisit at the mid-year time. So again, you have to have the information. I think that one of the things that I like about the strategic plan and getting to that level of granularity often is you get what you measure. And so that's a belief from my business world. And so I think that by bringing in those measurements, it may have caused a lot of anxiety for some people. I get that. But at the same time, I don't know how we can continue to have conversations with our legislatures about funding us more when they turn around and say to us, you know, you're pretty much failing. And so what do you need more money for? What are you going to do with the money? And if we gave you more money, what would it change? And so we weren't able to answer questions like that. And so to me, if we're not being driven by a strategic plan that gets us to the ability to actually know who we are and what we're doing in our district, then I don't know that we can continue to just go lobby for increases in money from the state or give us what we didn't get. When, if you look at our results across the board, we're underperforming, like most places in the state. So I'm not saying we're alone in that. But again, the question is, what are we going to do to change our position on that? And I hope we won't lower our standards, and I'm sure we won't, but I don't want us to de-emphasize the urgency of closing these achievement gaps. I think that has to be critical for us. But now if the community feels differently, I think Dr. Thomas needs to know that.
Absolutely.
And so that means that when, as Dr. Thomas and her team come forward to present the update on where your organization is with moving the strategic plan forward because of the work that they've already done. What will be reported will be their high-level plans for addressing the items that are in your strategic plan and indicators, and you all will agree on what those indicators are, which means that you know how you will be measuring progress towards the priorities that you have in that plan. So that sounds as if it's forthcoming. Remember, the joint agreement as a governance team will be around how are you going to measure, what does progress look like, and what kind of reports do we expect to receive that are aligned with that. And so some of those reports will be big picture when she brings those to you, because if you're looking at an entire uh, school district as it relates to the elementary level and progress towards literacy, since we use that as an example, then she will give you where the baseline was and what's transpired over X period of time. And here's where we are now. And here's what we did to get there. Here's what's working and here's what's not working. Therefore, here are the adjustments that we suggest that we make. So all of those items will be linked to that plan. And it sounds as if with the revisions that Dr. Thomas and her team have worked on, when she presents that to you, it will also reflect what she's suggesting as indicators to pinpoint progress to your goals.
And we also will be bringing data to show where we have ended up as best as we can without having summative measures at the end of this school year, but based on our previous metrics or goals, at least, we will be providing an update on that next month as well.
Okay.
Those will serve as your benchmarks for going forward, I'm presuming.
Yes, yes.
Julie, I did not understand your statement. I'm sorry.
So when she gives you a report of where y'all are, those
Yeah.
will serve as your benchmarks for where you start with the updated plan in terms of the metrics.
Yes, in terms of coming to an agreement on how that's going to work. Okay, and I think the budgeting process ties into this as well, because I don't think there's been any program that was brought into the district that wasn't presented to the board as a tool to be used to achieve the goals and the objectives of the strategic plan. And so we typically vote on those things. And that's also enumerated in the, that wouldn't be a consent agenda item, but it would be an action item for the board. And so when we end those programs, I think we've typically had some indication of why we ended them and, you know, how did they perform, how they performed against expectations. And so that needs to be a part of our strategic plan as well, in terms of the tools that we're using and the budgetary items that we're investing in to achieve the goals of the strategic plan.
So aligning your budget with your strategic plan, yes, that's definitely an action step I would recommend you put down.
Well, I think the point that's best is that we align it all the way from start to finish, so that when we cancel a program or take it out of the budget, that we actually have some kind of post-mortem on it, if possible. So what do we get for our money? Because I think that's a question that's come up more than once in my time on the board, and we usually don't really have an answer.
It's a great question to ask, though.
And I agree with you on that one.
It's a great question to answer. I've dealt with this for 40 plus years, folks. One of the things that I've always been curious about, from the state to the local system, and as John mentioned a few minutes ago, you know, when you purchase a program and all of a sudden you take it out of the budget. Now, I said all of that to say this: we don't stick with something long enough. We really don't. And when I say we, I'm not only talking about Clark County School District. You know, you're not going to get instant results with something that you purchase through the budget or whatever. You're just not going to get instant results. You got to work with it long enough to get some results. And sometime when you start getting better results, all of a sudden, get rid of it. I've always had a problem about that. I've always had a question about that. You know, some of you all probably remember this. I know Dr. King, you probably remember this, and Julie. Reading across the curriculum. I liked it. I really did. And all of a sudden, after about maybe 2.5 years, it disappeared. Another thing, core curriculum. How many of you all hear anything about core curriculum? There were some people just pushed back with that, push back. I had a genuine interest in it because when you in Athens, Georgia, and you move to Los Angeles, California, in terms of co-curriculum, algebra going to be algebra, calculus going to be calculus. But like I said, these ideas would be pushed forward. And because I think I know the reason for some of this to change is sometime when you change administration, and that's from the state to the local system, then different programs are brought in from different administrators. We got to learn to stick to something. You know, we're dealing with adolescents and teaching them. But anyway, I just want to share
That's
that.
one way to really frustrate teachers is to keep changing.
Yes.
You know, so, and you're right. It's from the governor on down to the state DOE to a new administration, a new board turnover, new superintendent, all of the above affect that. So you're absolutely right. It can be very frustrating, but it does take time.
Just like what we're doing now, digital learning, virtual learning, etc. And I just have to say this in the defense of a superintendent. Dr. Lanou got all sorts of pushback on that. Where would Clark County School District be now if he would have said, okay, well, we're not going to do it? Right now, virtual learning, digital learning going on. Had he not done, when I said he, I'm referring to Dr. Philip Lanou, had he not kept pushing with that, and right now with this pandemic going on, this school district will have some tremendous challenges, no doubt in my mind.
So we had the forethought, I guess, way back
Yes.
when. Anything else? Any other comments about strategic planning before we move to board meetings?
So just a quick recap on notes. Takeaways will be referencing the strategic plan items on the agenda, quarterly reports to the board. These are things that you mentioned for monitoring, quarterly reports to the board. Also, the last piece that surfaced was budget aligned to your plan. So those are some things you probably want to capture. And I only mentioned those because that's what I heard you say.
I also added in a couple more that you are going to be adding in, I guess, looking at your current plan to update it, adding in equity to everything, and then getting a commitment from the community and input from the community on what you develop.
Can I add one comment?
Sure.
One of the things I've noticed just in the short time I've been on the board is this very tight coupling between evaluating our strategic plan and our student achievement with evaluating the superintendent. And I guess it seems like if we go to quarterly reports of the student achievement, we can uncouple that a little bit from the superintendent evaluation step, because as you mentioned at the beginning, they've been very tightly lockstep with each other. And I think that got us into trouble because in an environment where there wasn't a lot of trust, it felt like the books were being cooked from the perspective of some, that the student achievement was being overstated, or we were looking at certain indicators but not other indicators. And so I guess it would be my thought to try to uncouple those, at least in a short-term environment. You know, maybe you evaluate over a 3 or 4 year plan, or I don't know I mean, of course the superintendent has to be evaluated on student achievement and strategic plan, but not in such tight steps, because it just gets problematic.
Yeah,
I agree.
We did indicators for the year, each year on how that was one of the superintendent's goals out of like 3 or 4 big ones for the year. And, her goal was to get 75% of the indicators, in a positive direction, for instance. How did she meet those? And it was doable once those indicators came back and we chose what they were. And it was all based on our plan.
That's interesting. Thank you for that.
Sure.
We might have heard something different, but I agree with what I'm trying to understand the tightness of the coupling with the superintendent's evaluation and the strategic plan. Sorry. I don't know what that was. Okay. But isn't that pretty much what we evaluate the superintendent on, is the execution of the strategic plan? Isn't that what the evaluation is?
Yes, that's correct. The superintendent's evaluation is aligned with the strategic plan. The challenge that you have as a governance team is to agree on what progress should look like from the beginning of your evaluation cycle to the end. And so that's why these initial conversations that you have around those priorities are important. But to your question, the superintendent's evaluation should be aligned with the strategic plan, because that's what you're saying to your superintendent that you want her to be working on with her team. The other piece that I mentioned is that you have to agree on what reasonable progress should look like across those buckets. And student achievement is at the core of that. However, to get to student achievement, you've got other indicators and other priorities that you've also pinpointed, from the communication piece to the climate piece as it relates to students and staff, all those things that I'm sure surface in your strategic plan somewhere. And so those are measures that your superintendent is working on action plans throughout the year with that. And so that's why I mentioned baseline in terms of where you're starting. Where do you want to be by mid-year? Where do you want to be by the end of the year? And what's a fair evaluation of that? Because you've got to have incremental growth, and you can get bogged down. I think Board Member Yeager was alluding to having to be so wedded to the small buckets from the start to the end, and not knowing how you're going to evaluate or how you're going to determine what progress is. That's why you have to have those conversations around those priorities. What do you agree upon as a governance team? And you remember when we talked about this, we suggested to you that with the superintendent's evaluation, once you have it aligned with the strategic plan, you should also have that mid-year conversation around how you feel you're doing, and with that, so that adjustments can be made. And if you use that student achievement piece as an example, that is incremental, because she's going to be having some benchmarking and formative checks, and things are going to be happening in the classroom from the beginning of the school year up until mid-year. And those formative checks will show her and give her the mechanism to show you what kind of progress is being made, so that at the end of the year, that's not new, because you will already know the incremental steps that are being taken. So without that conversation around what progress should look like and agreeing on it, then it makes it difficult for you to do what we just mentioned. So you all are in the major steps of moving in that direction.
And I will just emphasize coming to agreement. Like Sam said, you both have to be on the same page, the board and the superintendent. It's a give and take. Y'all are a team.
So given that we'll be having a presentation of the strategic plan next month at a board meeting, would it then make sense at some point after that, maybe a couple weeks or maybe a month later, to have that conversation at that point with the superintendent specifically about what the evaluation will look like and what progress looks like, and have that agreement? Would that be something we should do at that time, or should we do it at the same time as the strategic plan is presented?
It will probably be very difficult to do it at the same time.
Okay, that's what I was
Because you've got a lot of information to internalize, because you're looking at the priorities and what Dr. Thomas presents, and then once you do your review and have some reflection time and do have a couple of work sessions, you can have conversation about that and then make some adjustment. I'm sure you have priorities already that you're measuring, but when she makes this presentation, you might modify what those are, or more accurately, you'll make adjustments with action steps that she's utilizing to get to those priorities, because that's what she's doing. And so you'd have that conversation after that presentation to see if you need to tweak anything. I
Right.
wouldn't suggest that you plan to try to do all of that at the time that she's making that presentation, because that's not likely that you're going to have enough time to do that.
Okay.
Plus, you're going to get community input as well as
Yeah.
board input in that process.
Yes.
So, you know, 2 months maybe at the earliest. I mean, it's a big undertaking. And I don't know
And it's
where you
some-
are right now in your
Yeah.
process with your evaluation. If y'all are on a summer to summer program, or if you're December to December.
I think we talked last time about how we're gonna revisit the policy and revise it so that the end of year is actually the end of the school year. And so do an academic year cycle. And so I guess then that would allow us to do that at the end of the academic year with this new strategic
Right.
plan.
that sounds like good timing.
I would like to just ask this question of Sam and Julie, and I just for my own clarification. The evaluation, the superintendent has to be in line with the strategic plan. I get that. You can't have a strategic plan where you're saying, reading score is 12%, but then when it comes to evaluation, say we're not talking about reading, we're going to talk about science instead. And I get that. But I thought I heard Julie say, and I may have misunderstood, but I thought you said, can you evaluate on other things as well? Or if it's not in the strategic plan, then it is not up for as part of the evaluation process.
You can, but the thing is usually everything falls into those overarching, 4 or 5 main goals. So for instance, one year, the city of Decatur wanted to annex in property, and how is that going to affect the school system? Well, it took Dr. Edwards off course and her staff to try to come up with demographic studies. That wasn't typically part of our strategic plan, but board and community relations was. And so how do we work well with our local government to make those decisions that are going to impact our student population detrimentally, and we have to build schools overnight, so everything can fall into it. But every year is different as well. You might have a facility plan where you're opening a new high school. Well, that's a big undertaking. So I would make that a goal. Did you do it on time and under budget? Did you meet the goals of the instructional goals that you had for that facility? There's a bunch of things that go along with that. So we would evaluate her based on kind of like the self-evaluation for a school board member. There's an evaluation for a superintendent. How are they dealing with staff? How are they doing with community responses? All that stuff. But then we would pull out like 3 to 4 major goals that were kind of not really outside of that, but we wanted her to focus on those. So we opened an early learning center my first year on the board. It was a public-private partnership. So that was something that was getting at the achievement gap, right? Which was one of our main goals. And we opened this facility to get kids birth through 4 in there. The sooner we got them, the better they're going to be, right? So that wasn't really part of the plan at the time. It became part of the plan, but reducing the achievement gap was the overarching goal.
Right.
We pulled that out just to say, hey, we know that you got to focus on this. It's a lot of operational issues, and she knocked it out of the park. So she got a good review, right? So, and over the years, we have seen how that early learning center has definitely affected our achievement gap for the betterment of Decatur.
But did you, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead,
My
Lynn.
question would be, and I appreciate that, that's excellent, and I agree. I don't think we've asked for anything that's not under our 6 major initiatives for what the board wants to see happen in the district. But the agreement on how it's going to be measured is the thing that we tended to disagree on. And so if you haven't met or sat down with the superintendent to say, you know, what is the outcome on this and how will we measure progress on this, or how do you want to be evaluated on this, then I don't think you, in my opinion, I wouldn't feel comfortable evaluating somebody on something that we didn't set an objective on, so that we were at least moving in the same direction to measure success. That's the piece that I have a problem with. So something like a big project like that, you had to do expenditures on that. There were probably some indicators in how that early learning center was going to be rolled out. There were some objectives out there. There was budget allocated. So you had something there to actually measure that person on, and you were probably somewhat in agreement, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of different metrics, but we all agreed to them. You know?
Exactly. The point is you agreed to it. And so my issue is I don't want to evaluate somebody on something that we haven't agreed on what the measurement is going to be.
Correct.
And those are all great points. And to along that line, just to recap, the strategic plan, the superintendent's evaluation, it is the best practice to have it aligned with the strategic plan, the superintendent's evaluation. That is referenced and mentioned in your self-assessment process and the elements as well. So that's one thing. And there was one question about should it be solely linked to the strategic plan? And the answer to that is no, it does not have to be, but it needs to be aligned to the strategic plan. And if there are other priorities that you all agree on, then they can be included, yes. But the strategic plan should not be excluded because that is the bulk of the work that you are requiring your superintendent to move forward. Now, examples like what Julie alluded to, in addition to the strategic plan, some examples are, how does the superintendent provide leadership that we've seen before? You know, providing leadership to the entire organization and supporting leadership. Communication, how does the superintendent communicate with the staff, the community, the board? Another example it centers on facilitating board development and board governance. Those kinds of things sometimes are not in the strategic plan, but the governance team decides that those things are important and you decide to capture those. That doesn't mean you have to, but the question was asked about that in terms of what if we wanted to take a look at things that we think are important that might not be mentioned in the strategic plan. Then you can do that, but you need to agree on those things as a governance team, that those are things that your superintendent should be working on. So I hope that helps with that.
And Dr. King, looking at the superintendent evaluation process kind of in the terminology of a teacher evaluation, if there are other things that the governance, the board members would like to see linked to the strategic plan, should that be articulated like at the pre-conference beginning of the year phase, rather than maybe at the mid-year or even at the end of the year? So should those things not only be agreed upon, but articulated and documented with whomever the leader is at the beginning of that year?
The beginning of that evaluation cycle, yes.
Okay.
Yes, those things that are important for the evaluation of the superintendent that your governance team has agreed upon should be pinpointed and identified at the beginning of the evaluation cycle. It is at the mid-year typically that you have a status check on how you think you're doing. But if you're doing quarterly reports on the strategic plan, et cetera, that's going to be easy for you to do, because once you hit mid-year, you will have received multiple indicators of how you've made progress towards the majority of the things that you're going to be evaluated on. So it's a mid-year check and a discussion on how you're doing. The things that happen at mid-year could center on making adjustments related to the things that will spell growth. It doesn't change the priorities, but you could decide, well, you know, we want to tweak an action step that we're utilizing to go after this particular priority. However, that doesn't catch anybody by surprise because it's still the same priority, but the means for reaching that end will be shifted or tweaked. But you don't add new things mid-year for that evaluation cycle. You have to agree on those at the beginning of the evaluation cycle. At the end of the
Okay.
evaluation cycle, when you do the summative, of course, you have more conversation, and then you can start new priorities for the next coming cycle. Julie, thoughts on that?
I absolutely ditto.
So just to kind of summarize this in the biggest of pictures. So at the beginning of an evaluation cycle, the board and superintendent agree on what the metrics will be, what's important and what the metrics will be for measuring it. And then through the year, the board receives information from the district, right, through the superintendent, in terms of how the district is doing on those metrics. And then the superintendent is evaluated by the board based on the statistics that are provided on those metrics that come from the district.
Correct. So you have the Assembly evaluation module, and we can load that evaluation in, and she can provide evidence, upload evidence throughout the year. And so it's captured right there. And when it's time for the formative and then the summative, it's all there. And, you've got your evidence, just because sometimes you forget, oh yeah, I forgot we did that 8 months ago. So you want to make sure that you look back over the evidence before you, measure how you think she did on it.
That's correct. And that gives your superintendent and the administration an opportunity to upload information throughout. Because when she makes those quarterly reports, the quarterly reports are going to be accompanied with some supporting documentation that you're going to receive. And if you're using Assembly, you can just click on that particular priority and you can see evidence already from a quarterly standpoint. Makes it more efficient once you hit mid-year, when you have that mid-year conversation. The thing that we always remind governance teams of with this too is that, of course, that everything is not going to be quantitative. Some of these items are going to be qualitative kinds of items in terms of what's being uploaded related to it. Student achievement, of course, when measuring start to finish, typically will be quantitative, but there are other items that might be qualitative that she's showing you surveys or some reports on what's happening with the community or meetings that she might have had with various stakeholders, and it's uploaded into the system and it's already there. So good question.
I have two questions that hopefully will be quick. One, obviously it's best practice to do this at the beginning of the evaluation cycle, which means it would have already have been done for this school year. But since it hasn't been done and we're having the strategic plan presentation next month, my thought, what I mentioned before, having a meeting like a month or so later would be the time where we sat down and agreed upon the indicators and what would be on the evaluation. Is that reasonable? Okay. And then my other question was, which I didn't realize, because we bought this evaluation module for the self-evaluation, that also gives us access to the superintendent evaluation. Okay, that's great.
Correct. And
Okay.
Many school districts use it to evaluate teachers, principals. I mean, it's an evaluation module. You put in what you want,
Okay.
Everybody's goals and objectives can be uploaded on this. And
Oh,
evidence-
okay, so maybe somebody can bring me up to date outside of this meeting on what we have available to us in Assembly. My question would also be, is there a module that supports the strategic plan being uploaded to Assembly and those action items being tracked? And is that something that we've also bought?
Y'all haven't bought it yet. We hope you will come back to Assembly with all the modules, so they can intersect with each other. But yes, we do have our strategic planning module for sure, and we call it planning. And we have
And
meetings.
so what?
And we
Okay,
have,
yeah, I won't take up our time on this call with that, but I would be interested in seeing all of these features demonstrated to us,
Okay.
since they're new. And again, I may be the only board member who doesn't know about them, but I would love to see that presentation.
Yeah, we've talked about doing a demonstration for the whole board whenever y'all are ready. We're ready anytime. We can do it remotely. We could come see you, whatever y'all want.
So again, that, okay, you're taking, I'm going circular now, so I'm ready for us to move on because I just want to see how that aligns
Okay.
with our strategic plan.
All right, so the next domain is board meetings. And it looks like six of you said you needed improvement. And so board meetings, the description is in order to conduct official business for the purpose of improving student achievement and organizational effectiveness. The governance leadership team plans and conducts board meetings in accordance with the open meetings law and local board policy. Standard A says the board announces and holds meetings in accordance with local board policy and the open meetings law. And then we've got several elements for that. How many are there? There's 9. And again, satisfactory, you got 4, needs improvement 6. And to summarize your comments, some of the things we've talked about, the agenda is not aligned to strategic plan priorities. And sometimes the time used in the meetings is not consistent with the strategic plan and focusing enough on increasing student achievement. It seems like the strategic plan might be an afterthought. Comments about hogging the microphone and grandstanding on non-agenda items. More specifics needed about the process of building an agenda. That was mentioned several times. There have often been questions about what can go on the agenda and so forth. The norms and policy upgrades will help this to better channel this strategic endeavors and away from operational issues, hopefully. Executive sessions have been repeatedly used improperly by some members to indulge in topics not appropriate for executive session. And the conduct of some board members behind closed doors is worse than in the public. Would appreciate basic ethical principles for board governance because some are ignored by those who in the public claim to be working on issues they say they are. Some of the solutions on how to move forward for improvement, some are already being done. You've had parliamentary procedures training. You're updating the strategic plan to hopefully incorporate it into your meeting agenda items. You're also in the process of developing board norms. Conflict management, communicating effectively, and team building would also be great topics that was mentioned. And according to your Cognia report, they listed some insights and observations and said there's a lack of efficiency in nearly all the meetings of the board, as evidenced in several video recordings where the board was not focused on continuous improvement of the school district in terms of student achievement. So that is that in a nutshell. Comments? Thoughts?
We had an awesome meeting this month. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Gant.
Good. I know that these observations by Cognia are almost a year old, so I know y'all have made some improvements in that area. You know, we always recommend coming to, come to board chair workshop. It doesn't have to be a vice chair or board chair that comes, but we talk about how to run meetings effectively, and everybody can benefit from that. And we have those coming up soon, Sam, right? Is that February?
Yes.
Board chair?
Well, in 2021, yes, there will be 2 opportunities for that. So just stay tuned. It should have been referenced in the catalog that was sent earlier. Some of it, of course, is a moving target with the pandemic and whether it's going to be face-to-face or virtual, of course. So stay tuned for that. To add to that, I would also remind you that to capture the things that Julie mentioned already, because a lot of this in reference to your board meetings and the comments were related to the strategic plan. And you've already pinpointed the need to have that alignment with agenda items and the strategic plan. You've also had professional development sessions as a governance team related to board meetings. The procedure, all of those things, make sure that that's captured in your documenting that you're doing for Cognia, as well as in your document for your improvement for this self-assessment that we're discussing now. So I think that it sounds as if you were in pretty good shape with that. The last piece that I mentioned, there was some reference in the comments to executive session. I don't know how relevant it is today. You need to ask yourself if it is, but you have to police yourselves as board members and as a governance team in reference to that. Of course, your legal counsel will help you with that, with, while you're in executive session, topics that should be discussed in executive session and confidentiality of executive session. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with that, because you probably have already addressed those and comments, and because we noticed that some of the comments referenced some things that were pretty dated or old. So I just wanted to mention that to ensure that type of, I guess, lack of a better way to say it, behavior, if it's true to executive session, that you know that it's changing. Those are my thoughts.
And the reason why I mentioned board chair workshop as a great one for anybody to come to is because Phil Hartley gives a great talk, and so does Zinda. And we try to address leaders of leaders and some of the issues that arise, and it's just good for all board members to be on the same page.
I think one thing that we've really done that has been very helpful, and I'm still trying to get caught up, is board reports. I think that Dr. Gant's done a great job in terms of really pushing board reports to be very distinct, and to, if there are material that can be uploaded to the agenda ahead of time, that would be much better. And so I've really tried to change my focus on my contribution in terms of board reports, and try to take that leadership.
Great. Other thoughts?
I think in terms of the time that's been used in meetings, and both regular meetings and also I'm thinking of work sessions, it has been reports. And I think over the last year, it's not a dated comment, that reports have been taking up a fair amount of time, and not just from the board. So if there are ways to shorten reports and give more executive summaries and allow and trust board members to read reports in advance, I think we can have quicker meetings. I think that's one reason we did have a relatively quick meeting this past time, although the work session went pretty long for the amount of kind of actionable material. I think I would guess that our reports probably took about maybe up to 2/3 of our work session. And it's good to have discussion, but that I'm a big fan, just as Linda has said, she's a big fan of kind of corporate approach. I do like the executive summary approach, where board members have more time to ask questions and maybe a little less time of having the presentations kind of read to them, because we should have a high bar for what our board members do, and one of those high bars should be that we're doing the work in advance.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did notice that in the Cognia report, they did quote some community members as saying it didn't feel like some of the board members are coming to the meetings prepared. So I can't stress enough that you read your packet ahead of time, you get prepared, you ask questions to the superintendent if you have questions or clarifications needed, so that you aren't spending so much time rehashing things that people should have read ahead of time. I like the idea of executive summaries. That's very helpful.
But I do think in terms of our work sessions, when we've been given reports by the administration, sometimes, and I understand that they're trying to present the most current information possible, but if we don't, if there's going to be, and I think this is what John was talking about as well, if we're going to be given a PowerPoint presentation, to have that even if we can have it a day ahead of time, even though if it's not up to the minute, if we had a day or two to look at it, and then instead of seeing it for the first time when somebody shows it to us, and then the question is, well, do we ask questions on on each slide, or do we, instead of do we wait to the end, and that tends to draw out the meetings, whereas if we had it beforehand, then the superintendent or her designee could say, okay, you saw the information that was presented. Are there specific questions that you have? And then have maybe the PowerPoint in front, but we could actually say, well, on slide 7, this was, this didn't seem to make sense to me, or this didn't become part of what I thought we were trying to achieve. So I think both from an individual board member's perspective, but also from the administrative side as well. And we tended not to have that problem at our regular meetings, because we didn't, most of the presentations we were given from leadership took place in the work sessions. And so our meetings would only be 3 hours long, but the work sessions would be 4.
Well, sometimes, you're right, the staff can't get it ahead of time, but if you could see it ahead of time, that would be helpful. But sometimes it's important for the staff to present it and talk through it so that the community also benefits, because it would be the first time they've seen it.
Okay.
I really like that, especially if it's, I'm sorry, John.
No, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, I especially like things that have high impact on the district, on our kids, on learning, on our environment. I really like those presentations to be made at the regular board meeting, so that the public can hear and be informed about what's happening, because it just makes it that much easier to have conversations with them about the current thinking in the district.
Correct.
Good point.
I guess I would just say that in other trainings, we've been told that our board meetings are board meetings where the public is present, but it's not we're not supposed to think that it's really for the public. So if we want to do it that way, that will continue to make meetings probably longer than Cognia might like. And so it would just have to be understood at the Cognia level that there's an intention here to present things that the board itself could have already assimilated, but it's really being done for public display.
For those important topics, yes, with like the strategic plan that's going to be presented.
No, that sure, but I think we've heard a lot of reports that were discussed frame by frame, slide by slide. I guess I'm just in favor of flipping the classroom on this.
And that's fine. You got to do what works for y'all. But not every report might be worthy of having that done. And that's fine. You pick and choose.
Yeah, I think high impact things should definitely be, and again, I've been on this board and I've seen those presentations twice. One in the work session where we had all of the time to take it apart and get the information that we needed to make an informed decision. And then I've seen that a similar report, maybe a shorter version, just presented so that the community at large knows what's going on. And I think that's still important, because that helps them to be able to communicate with us.
And so what happens then is, since our meetings are viewed online, since both the work session and the regular meetings are online, then what happens is that we do go over a fair amount of the same terrain twice sometimes.
Yes.
And that's for both the public and the board. The only people that it wouldn't be true of are people that would come to one meeting or not the other, and not watch it online.
I'm good with that. Especially when we can get back to in-person meetings, because I talk to a lot of constituents that do not watch our meetings online. They don't do YouTube and that kind of stuff. So they miss getting information. Yeah, they're in my age group too.
And a part of that will be for you to paint the accurate picture for the community that a lot of your discussion and problem solving and work will be done at the work session. And so
Yes.
once your community realizes that, then they would log into or attend work sessions when you're face to face, and they can see and hear your discussion about simple topics and also challenging topics. And then you would also state that based on our discussion at the work session, we will have a recommendation and action item that will take place at the regular session. And then even at the regular session, your chair can remind the community that we had extensive conversation on item X, Y, or Z, and tonight we're going to take action. And so as the community understands that that's going to be your mode of operation, then they'll be used to it. So, but it takes a little bit of time to build that kind of culture, which is what you're doing now.
I agree. And I think it would be good for us to remember that we said what we said that at the work session, and so we don't have to repeat that part.
Right. The work session is always the meat of everything, so hopefully people are aware of that. But if not, definitely spend some time educating the public on that. So that's
I want to give a plug before you leave too far from this, because you talked about the superintendent's workshop training. I've been to that a couple of times, and each time I spent time talking to different board members. So I had a good conversation with the DeKalb County, and that was a board that I truly admired from the way they presented and how they manage their board relationships. And then another one, I think that whole board has been removed now, but I've talked to them about the problems that they were having. Mm-hmm. And so you get to learn a lot about what's happening across the state, and just in that opportunity to have a little bit of camaraderie with the other districts.
Absolutely.
Can I say something?
What?
I was just going to add, one of the things also in my short time on the board that I've seen evolve in a good way is there are no surprises. And this has been an effort on both the part of the superintendent, who has been giving us weekly updated reports, which we were not getting before that I was aware of. And also the board president, board chair has been setting the agenda in a very open and transparent way. And I think the combination of both of those means that we don't have somebody showing up and, making a motion at the beginning of, I think I'm the only one who did, and I had to add a agenda item at the last minute. So, I think we've all been very aware of this idea, sort of this ethic of no surprises. And I think that's made a huge difference in our meetings. We don't have these big contentious gotcha moments, which has been really improving.
That's music to our ears. That's great.
One of the things I would like to remind board members of as well is my availability, and thereby the availability of our staff, that if there are questions that come up after a work session, that you all are welcome to reach out and ask me, and I can ask the staff for any clarifying information prior to coming to the next, the regular meeting, so that we can get questions answered for you in advance and not have to utilize that time in board meetings. I think that can help to streamline as well.
Absolutely. I highly recommend you do that. Hopefully there's enough turnaround time for when they get the board packet. Our superintendent used to call us, of course she only had 5, not 10, 9, to see if we had any questions if she hadn't heard from us, or she'd send out an email. So as long as there's two-way communications, you definitely can save a lot of time at board meetings when you've already had your questions answered.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment on that, because in developing norms, and my norms were developed around board meetings. And what you just said a few minutes ago, Julie, and also what Dr. Thomas said, I put that in a norm, that if you have a question, a burning question, don't wait until the board meeting. You send that question to the superintendent. Another way to say that, you just don't blindside not only the superintendent, staff members, because many times the superintendent going to call, if a question is asked about finance, many times the superintendent is going to refer to the CFO.
Right.
So forth and so on. So, but in developing these norms, we got to follow these norms. You can put that on paper, but if you don't implement it, it doesn't mean anything.
Amen to that. And sometimes, I would say, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask this question in the meeting, even though I know the answer to it, for the public's, benefit, so that they can understand, but you let them know ahead of time. But it sounds like y'all are moving in the right direction with no surprises. And your board norms are definitely going to help you with this. It's going to make your life
Yeah,
light.
and to add to that, because I know I spoke with several people, one of them, because he's deceased now, Commissioner Jerry Neesmith. He said, "Well, we don't talk more than 3 minutes. If we go beyond 3 minutes, you're gonna be cut off because you prolonging the time." I also put that in the norm, okay? Because sometimes people can go on and on and on, and they've gone full circle, 360 degrees, and you say to yourself, "What are they talking about?" But anyway, 3 minutes is long enough.
Yeah, we had that in our norm too, to not hog the mic for action items, but 3 minutes max on your comments at the end of the meeting. It really helped us. I mean, some of our meetings were going till 2 a.m. It was really bad. So
Yeah, that's terrible.
it needed it.
Okay, we're probably at transition time. We've gone through 2 domains now. We probably need to take a 5-minute quick
Yeah.
stretch break
Thanks.
and then return and finish the final 2. We've got a third one, but we touched on that third one earlier in your first session. But so I think we're in pretty good shape. We're on schedule to be able to complete all of these. So based on what I see, it's about 7:47. Can we commit to returning at 7:55? Is that okay?
Thank you.
All right, I see thumbs up.
Thank you.
7:55, we'll see you back. Chairman Gant, were you commenting? Because you're muted. Were you making comments?
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking to my daughter who's
Okay.
who's trying to figure out who's on this meeting. Let's
All
hear
right. I think, yeah. So I think we're at a point to get started. Chairman Gant, any opening comments before we move forward?
No, not that I can think of.
All right. So here's a suggestion to the team, and you let me know if you're okay with it. If we could, we've got really 3 domains left to talk about, although one we've hit pretty heavily already. So if we could try to hold ourselves accountable in terms of 15 minutes per domain, and if you see something that changes that, let me know that. And so with 3, if we hold ourselves to 15 minutes, that gets us 45 minutes with a few additional minutes left for questions. So if we could do that, we're almost at the 8 o'clock mark. So that gives us from 8 until 8:15 for the first domain, if we need that. And that then will help us stay true to it so that we don't end up at the end of the night still having something left over. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, Julie, you want to kick us off with the next one?
So domain for policy development. The description for the whole domain is the board adopts, revises, and follows written policies in accordance with laws and state board rules that include, but are not limited, those that support improved student achievement, fiduciary responsibility, community and stakeholder engagement, organizational effectiveness, and continuous improvement. Standard A states that the Board of Education adopts, revises, and follows written policies that are clear, up to date, and in compliance with the school system's strategic plan, state constitution, state and federal laws, and state board rules. And you see all the elements there, and it seems like you gave yourself a 5 in satisfactory and 5 in needs improvement. So you're kind of split. A synopsis of your comments were, the board committee was set up to fail under the previous superintendent, but in the era of the interim superintendent, the policy committee has become quite functional again. Also, the board has not been adhering to and the enforcement of its own policies back in 18 and 19. Our policy says we will review every policy every 5 years, but the systematic review process has apparently broken down and that hasn't been done. Some board members don't follow policies. Cognia gave the board a directive in the report issued to do so. Policy development, particularly recently, is one of our stronger areas. However, given the recent findings that some are not up to date, this is still an area that needs improvement. Also thinking more through how policy is related to the district's strategic plan and goals and its impact on children is definitely needed. Opportunities for training, perhaps even a manual on policy development would be helpful. Due to board turnover, we have lacked consistency from the board in keeping the focus on a systemic approach to ensure that our objectives are met. And since the Cognia report, the school board has worked very hard with the policy committee twice a month to update policies that are more in line with transparency and the smooth operation of the district. The latest decision of the policy committee was to pair a current board member of the board with a member-elect to review one section of policies with the goal of at least have each policy examined by the year end. Now, in your Cognia review, there was quite a few things stated. Under leadership capacity standard, the governing authority establishes and ensures adherence to policies that are designed to support system effectiveness. And your directives for improvement are to revise the policy manual to ensure that all system policies are current and adhere to state law when applicable, to provide regular professional learning sessions concerning board policy topics that will help with the effectiveness and efficiency of board meetings, to review the board committee structure policy, to develop and implement a plan to make certain that board committee work does not pose potential violations of other board policies as well as state and federal regulations. In other words, to ensure effectiveness and adherence to open meetings laws and not to be put in a situation where there's potential to micromanage or direct staff. And develop written policy procedures to ensure the number of members of board committees does not present the possibility of a quorum being established during the convening of a meeting. And to adopted policies should be routinely reviewed and revised as needed to ensure consistency and adherence to operational practices. Board members should also engage in training to ensure they have knowledge and awareness to effectively follow and support the policies they have approved. So that was the synopsis of what Cognia said, but it did say that they recommended a full policy review, not just of section B, but of all the policies since many were out of date. Comments, thoughts?
So I can speak to what we're doing right now. Our meeting this afternoon, we got through 25 policies. We reviewed and or rescinded old ones. We've accelerated the pace at which we're working through these policies. We've got a lot. Out of the 300 policies, 200 of them were more than 10 years old. So, and quite a few of them, 100 of them are more than 20 years old. So we really are trying to tackle this. And I think we've got a system that we can accomplish between now and December. I'm not sure we're going to get everything done, but we're going to get most of it done. And it's an approach that's just mostly a little bit of a bookkeeping approach, just trying to see which ones are clearly illegal or out of alignment with new laws, which ones are just badly worded and old. I don't think anybody's making any significant policy or philosophical revisions to any of these. We're just trying to get them cleaned up. And then at the end of the year, hopefully getting through the Cognia review, we can then set a more regular review of at least the critical ones. For example, 2 policies came up today that we decided not to push through because they need more time for us to look at. But I don't want to spend a ton of time on the ones that are kind of hard right now because we don't have the time. We're sort of triaging, I guess, is the best way to describe it. But everybody's cooperating. I'm really, really thankful that we're getting the full board support of this process. I appreciate that very much.
Your thoughts?
My comment would be that not so much we have policies, we've always had policies, right? To me, our challenge is in following our policies. And I don't know if that's because we didn't understand the policies or we didn't know we had the policies, but that would be my reason for rating this as one that needed improvement. We don't seem to have a mechanism for ensuring that even though we have a policy, we actually execute the policy.
Well, there's been so many old ones that nobody's even looked at in 10 years.
If I could say, I mean,
I'm not talking about those.
Okay, I think part of it, Linda, in my opinion, is that, and what I see is that we've had, like when our attorney, when we review policies, he says, yes, you've got this policy here, but you've also got it over here and you've got it over here. In other words, we had 300 policies, and I think we really need to follow the policies, but there is a quantitative point, a quantitative point where it's just too, you've got 3 different, you want to find out something and you got 3 different policies to kind of look at and jiggle. So I think, I don't know what other school boards do, but it seemed like that our school board, particularly in the 80s and the 90s, kind of like, if we talk about something, let's make it a policy. And so anyway.
Well, let me chime in here. One of the things in terms of following the policies, of course, now they're from A through M, and and as Patricia said a few minutes ago, I think she said 300. Well, if you walk around with all of that in your head, you could be a dangerous person. And I guess I'm speaking from a principal's point of view here. And as a board member, I think board members need to keep in mind, we are the governing body. And if you're the governing body and you're getting ready to do something, or make a decision on something, you got to think, wait a minute, I need to check and see whether I'm following the policy on this. Then, of course, you go to the website and you check it out. Now, as you said a few minutes ago, Greg, if you don't understand it, that's why we have an attorney that you would call the attorney to ask the attorney the opinion on that, or the rule on that, or whatever. But you got to keep in mind, folks, that, hey, the governing body, you can't jump and do something that you want to do because you think that is correct. And, you know, I had to govern myself accordingly as a principal, because once you do something, you have violated, you can't take it back. So the rule of thumb, just know that, it's a governing body, and we have policies to follow, we have laws to follow, and before you jump out there and do something, then that's what you need to do. Check it out. And it's much easier to check out now because you can go directly to the website. When I was a principal at Cedar Shows, because some of it was on the website when I retired, you had a great big notebook binder. But it was pretty easy to find a policy because everything was tabbed. And as I said, you know, these policies are coded A through M. So that's what you have to do.
But Charles, just an example, we had a policy on unemployment insurance. Well, the state tells you what, how to handle someone who gets laid off and applies for unemployment. We don't need a policy telling the superintendent what to do when somebody applies for unemployment. That's state law. And that's an example of what we have.
Well, I'm not understanding what you're saying, because what you just said, the first thing popped in my mind, you read a policy of that sort, then you need to call the superintendent or call human resources or call the attorney to make a ruling on it. I used to do it all the time until the superintendent said, oh, wait a minute, now don't call Tara Benton, because when you call him to ask him something, he's gonna put you on the clock and send me a bill. Call me first. But you just got to establish that rule of thumb before you jump out there and do something, and that you may regret later on.
I just wanted to clarify something that I think that Julie said. This domain is specific to developing policy, right? So I think you said that issues with following policy were under a different domain. Is that
No, it's
correct?
one.
Oh, it is under this one. Okay. I just wanted to make sure we weren't getting off topic.
So it says here, the Board of Education adopts, revises, and follows written policy.
Okay.
It does not say that the board develops policy. And that's where I'm concerned for you guys, because in this Cogni report, it says a review of the October 3rd, 2019 work session included a discussion about the work of the GSBA as part of an already established relationship with CCSS. The board president outlined 4 areas the GSBA is covering in its work. These areas included reviewing all policies outlined in section B. And it goes on to say, upon further review, we recommend that you update all sections in your full policy revision as a whole, because as I said before, as you know, some of these policies are really old. My concern is you guys are taking on something that the staff is supposed to be doing. You let them know the policy you want, but guys, you're like me, you are not a legal expert in K-12 education. And you're setting your system up for problems because you don't know what you don't know.
No, so that's not what we're doing. We're actually working very closely with assigned staff member. Dr. Thomas has been very awesome giving us the time of her staff members. I spent 5 hours last week with Mr. Schuneman working through the financial policies. Mr. Davis spent, I don't know how many hours the previous week working through the community relations with Beth and Mr. Harris. So we are not doing this on our own. We are absolutely supported
know
by
you're
the
not.
superintendent and getting the support of the staff and the chiefs.
Well, I would question that if you ask them privately, probably. I'm not putting words in his mouth, but I'm saying is, let's say you're working with the finance person and he recommends you do this in the policy and you disagree and say, no, I don't want to do that. So you've just directed staff directly. Instead of, you're going to be involved in policy making on the back end once the staff gets their stuff together and does their research, works with the legal team to make these presentable to the board. And then you're going to get community input on it. You're going to have a lot of input on it. And I know y'all want to come in and work hard, and policy is a lot of what you do, but high functioning boards are not policy makers. They're policy boards, but they adopt what's recommended. It's kind of like, personnel. You approve a position, say for a new principal at a new school. You're not the one that's writing the description. You're not the one that's posting the job, and you're not the one that's interviewing the candidates. You recommend or not, you vote up or down on it. You have a lot more say in policy development. It's not you just vote up or down. You do have a lot of input, but it's on the back end. And I want you guys to work smart, not so hard, because you guys are spending so much time on this, and you have so many other areas as a governance team that you really need to work on. And I'm concerned that going through 300 policies before your cognitive review,
200.
I don't want you to set your staff up to fail, and I don't want y'all to fail. And that's why I'm concerned. And I think you need to have, whether it's GSBA, I don't care, somebody to review your policies. Because I know when I was a board member, we did it twice in 12 years. The first time the staff did it themselves. We didn't do it as board members because we didn't have board committees. And if we did, we'd still be doing it 16 years later, probably, because we all work a lot. And we ended up doing a GSBA review like 5 years later, and we found out that we didn't need half those policies that we had spent a lot of money with our lawyer on. Because, Angela Palm and her group and Phil Hartley and Marvine Brooks at Harbin and Hartley, they know this like the back of their hand. And they save you a lot of heartache and a lot of time. And I'm just concerned that you're setting yourselves up to fail. And I don't want Cognia to come in and look at your policies and not be satisfied. So that's where I'm coming from, just, having worked with you guys for the past year. And we did talk about it last September. And that, we're here for you. Need that service anytime. But thoughts, I don't know.
Here's what confuses me. Revise the policy manual to ensure that all system policies are current and adhere to state law where applicable.
Sure.
Okay, that was directed at us. It wasn't directed, this was in the
At the district, right?
It's at the district, not at the board.
Right.
Because if you read standard 1 right here, the Board of Education adopts, revises, and follows written policies. So you're going to have input on those revisions, or whether you cancel a policy or whether you need a new policy. That's what you're there for. You're there to say, oh gosh, I know City of Atlanta, they just adopted a policy on sex trafficking because it's such an issue in the state of Georgia, even
I want it.
And so I think we need a policy on sex trafficking that includes
I don't want it, baby.
like educating all of our staff to look for signs, and you have your parameters, and then the staff goes and works on it with the legal team, talks to other districts in their field, and uses the policy module to search other policies that are similar, so that you're not reinventing the wheel every time. And I just want y'all to work smart and not so hard. And y'all have given so much time to this and everything else that you're doing. but y'all are meeting a lot every month, and I don't want y'all to get burned out. That's just me personally. And I'll get off my soapbox. I'm sorry.
Julie,
Yes.
I want to piggyback on what you just said because I mentioned the exact same. Pardon me?
Miss
Did I
Maddox,
jump
Dr.
ahead of
Maddox needs to
someone?
mute. No.
Hold on a second. Okay, I thought I was muted, but anyway, I said the exact same thing with the workshop on policy with Angela Pond, and I really appreciate what you said, that she, Phil, all of them, they know this like they know the back of their hands. And what I said to them, and it's surfacing in the state of Georgia, and they're up. I don't know whether we have school districts in the state of Georgia already have moved toward the superintendent and his or her staff actually developing policies and bring them to the board for approval. And the reason for that, they are skillful educators, et cetera, and they've had different courses in terms of what they need to write a policy on. But I do know, having attended these NSBA conferences over the years, there are some school districts in this country that are already doing that. And again, it is surfacing in Georgia, and pretty soon I think we're going to see that too.
Okay, could we get back to this? I think we've run out of time.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make the point that some of what Cognia said, I think I may have said this before, but since it keeps getting repeated, I'm going to keep shooting it down. They didn't actually check our policies when they complained about the quorum of board members and who appoints committees. They looked at a website. The website's been fixed, so I think we can cross that one off and not debate that anymore.
Oh, about the quorum at your policy committee?
Well, yeah, they were quoting off of the CCSD website, not from board docs, not from our policies, and trying to say that we had policies that would cause some kind of conflict. It was a red herring from the beginning, as far as I was concerned, because I would have expected Cognia to actually check our policies. But anyway, I think one of our problems is that we're trying to be responsive to Cognia because we've heard a lot of talk about how we're on the hook for having dragged the district into this. And so I think Dr. Yeager is to be commended for trying to take this by the horns, because obviously this didn't happen overnight. When you've got policies that date back to 1983, that's generations of superintendents and generations of school board members, and it's been dropped in our lap as if it's all our fault. And this is a very young board at this point, will be younger come January. So I understand Julie's concern about it, but it's then a little hard to know what we're supposed to be doing, because we were working on norms, and Julie said norms were important, but that we've kind of slowed down on that based on some of what has been said by Julie and Dr. King. Yeah, that we're working harder now on policies than on norms, in my opinion. And so I guess we're getting some mixed signals, or at least some of what's being said is being interpreted differently than it's coming out.
I would
make a-
focus on the norm and not the policies, because that's the role of the staff, is to work on those policies to present to you guys. Your norms, yes. I mean, I'm not a big fan of board committees, but when it's coming down to board work, board norm committees are great. Superintendent Eval committee, that's great, because that's the work of the board and it doesn't involve staff. Anytime you intermingle with staff, you might be setting them up to feel really uncomfortable, and you might be directing them indirectly. You don't even know it, just by being in the room.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
I was going to say, my views have shifted a good bit on this, but I actually agree. I agree with with what Julie has said, that I also like the process that we have, but I think the process that we have when we're looking at a few things, when we're looking at our long-term goals, to be able to do a thorough revision of the policy. And then we're looking historically at what some of the issues are that even led us here. I think it sets up, I think it's a few different things. I think it puts staff in a position where it's sort of prioritizing their work for them. And I also think that there are some inherent power differentials that a person may not feel comfortable. You know, if I'm working with Dr. Gaskins on something and he says, for instance, the I policies that we'll be working on, you know, I shared with somebody I was talking to that, oh, this is good. You know, my initial reaction was, this is good. I have a lot of ideas for curriculum. And then I had to sort of check myself and say, okay, this is not, you know, this is not necessarily your opportunity to say, oh yeah, we need to evaluate curriculum from an equity lens, fill in the blank. Now, is that the board's work once a policy has been revised or once it's been brought to us? Yes. But I just think with the areas that we're working through, and then also with the level of efficiency that is needed, particularly over the next 6 months to a year, I don't think it's the best use of our time as a governing team, at least at the outset.
So I've been watching the comments in the chat box and listening to the discussion throughout. And you need to determine as a governance team what your takeaways are with this, of course, because one item is related to cognitive, of course, for you to focus around. And the other is for you to get better as a governance team around those things that you feel are important as it relates to this policy piece. And if you notice the element number 1 under standard A, it says the governance leadership team promotes policy development. And so that means that you've got to have a process that allows you to do that, whatever that is. If you feel that you are able to begin to speak to how you are modifying, updating, and adopting new policies as they are required and that it's aligned with law, then as a team, you need to be able to speak to that. You're going to have to answer that question for yourselves. What Julie was emphasizing is that you do have a resource for that, which is one that GSBA offers, but you don't have to use that, but it is a resource for you. If you're not going to use that resource, then you just need to be able to ensure that you have a process that is going to incrementally allow you to get where you need to be with everything being updated. Now, back to cognitive, when they come for their visit in December, they're going to want to know what the kind of movement you've made and progress you've made related to that. You yourselves have stated that you want to improve on that. So you need to be able to look at what you feel you're doing now and if that's moving you in that direction. Those are things that are important. The administration, your administration is responsible for implementation of all of those policies. And that's in administrative rules that they do it. That's in action steps that they do it. Administrative rules and regulations that they do so. So you've got some reflecting to do on this.
Yes.
So just a few thoughts, and you need to capture where you feel you are with it. And I think this was one that you had your session with Angela Palm, and she went through some best practices with it. I don't know how much time you've had to come together as a team to try to agree on where you think you are, and if you feel your process that you have is being modified to get you there or not. Those are some things you really need to think about.
Well, I'll just say for myself that I felt better about it before today than I do right now, because I was under a completely different impression, I guess, about how policy development was supposed to work. And I understand that it is the job of the staff to sort of come up with the policies or come up with the way that they are supposed to work. but I guess I'm not sure how they're supposed to know that they're doing that, that they're supposed to do that. Like if the board is not supposed to be driving this process, then how does it work?
So if I may, it sounds to me, again, 8 years experience, and I've seen it done several ways. I've seen all of our B policies handed over to another attorney who went through and combined them, condensed them, and created some B policies for us. I've seen us working with staff, bringing things in, always through the policy committee, because the policy committee would then sit there and we would, again, do the same process, similar to the process we're doing now with the attorney's review and with the staff. The person on the staff would bring the policy to the policy committee, and we would do what we're doing now, which is evaluate it and make decisions and ask questions and then recommend that it go to the full board for a vote. So I think the only thing that concerns me, and after listening to Julie, is same thing that Lakeisha had, Dr. Gann had mentioned earlier in terms of our possibility of crossing over into that administrative line. That was a concern for me. The other concern for me is that we didn't enumerate the process, and Dr. Yeager took care of that. She wrote it out for me so I can clearly see the distinction between what we were doing, and that has been refined some. So I think I'm alarmed at this point that our process of simply reviewing the policies prior to it coming to the board is the thing that seems problematic. I think if we were simply having those people from those departments review those policies and bring them to the policy committee, I think we'd be fine. I think that's how we've worked in the past, and it wasn't the board initiated action. It was the board responding to, evaluating, and passing those policies up the line.
Right. So I guess my only thing is that I don't feel like the policy, the procedure that's being done right now is very different from the way it was done before, other than it's being accelerated and trying to do a lot of policies in a shorter amount of time, and is maybe using some more people to help out with that. So I guess my question is not really about what's being done currently, but if the board is not really supposed to be doing this at all, why have we been doing it like this for the past several years?
I don't think that's what's being said. In the state of Georgia, as I said earlier, I think all boards of education are doing exactly what we're doing. But as Julie said a few minutes ago, the people with the expertise would be the superintendent and their staff members. Why? Because they've gone through administrative courses, et cetera, and whatnot, and I have too. And I realize what should be in a policy in terms of governing the board. I think we're getting all mixed up in terms of overestimating our role here.
No, but I think that the staff is involved in the
I know
revision.
that. I know that, Carol, because of the fact that right now that's the way it is, and that's the way it always has been. But as I said earlier, I think sometime in the near future here, it's going to change, and it's going to change. To give you an example, Cognier will tell you the state of Georgia have had more complaints in terms of boards of education being put under review because they're not doing what they're supposed to do than any other state in this country. That's the problem. And I think that sometime in the near future, all of that is going to be corrected. People come onto the Board of Education thinking they got all of this power, in which they don't, rather than just following their role. And as Julie said a few minutes ago, the expertise in terms of developing these policies would be the superintendent and people on the superintendent staff and whatnot. And that's because of the training that they've had.
And I agree with that. I don't think anybody's disputing that. I think that I just was confused.
Well, I thought maybe I misunderstood you. I thought I heard you saying that if though the Board of Education and also what Patricia's doing now is wrong. I don't think it's wrong because you got a directive from Cognier. It is what it is now, but sometime in the future, it's probably going to change because of what Julie said.
Yeah, I was more responding to what Julie was saying, was that she felt like that this maybe wasn't the way that we should be doing it now. And I was just saying that not just right now in this sort of effort to meet the Cognia directives, but also previously, this is the way that policy development had been going. And I just wanted to know whether that was something that we should not be doing.
So as a best practice, absolutely, it's not what you should be doing. That's not what you should be spending your time on. And when we talked to you guys, I guess Sam and I first came out there last September, we brought this up, and I guess y'all have had a board policy committee for a while. And I applaud you, especially everybody on the policy committee, for undertaking this. You know, the way I read this report, it didn't say that y'all had to do that, but knowing what a best practice is, the staff needs to undertake that and then start presenting them to you. Doing 300 policies in a short amount of time, I don't know how good they're going to be, because the staff is already pulled pretty thin trying to reopen schools, you know, especially your academic officer with virtual learning and all that, all the stuff that the staff is having to do for kids. You know, I just, again, want you to work smart and not work so hard. You're going to be involved in the policy making process. Let's say that Angela Palm and GSBA do a whole policy evaluation once you get through with what you're doing. Even after the Cognia report, if you put in there that we're going to be doing that, they'll be relieved, because they know the quality of work that Harbin and Hartley and GSBA do, and it's at a much reduced cost for you guys because you're members. So it's a best practice for boards, and that's our job. Sam and I are here to, you know, try to prevent you from doing something that you're going to regret later. You know, it's like having kids, you know that they're going to make a mistake. You've already made that mistake. So let me try to tell them, they don't want to listen. So I just am trying to make sure that y'all are going in the right direction. And I applaud all the work that you've done so far on all these policies. But again, you're not policy experts. You're not legal K-12 school education lawyers. Neither am I. That's why if I trust my staff, I'm going to rely on the staff to do it, or another entity like GSBA or whomever else outside. So
Okay,
really,
we don't have time. I know we need to move on, but Julie, I really don't feel like we've communicated effectively about what we've been doing. So I think we need to move on to another discussion. But at this point, I feel like, personally, I feel misunderstood in terms of what we've been doing. But I do think I'm aware of the time.
Okay, just a quick last piece on that. It sounds as if you know that you're somewhat playing catch up on some of these items, because I think the common thread or common theme through this discussion is that you agree that there are some policies that are outdated. So because of that, and over the period of time, that you are having to take time to play catch up, and you cannot do that overnight. That's understood. The fact that you have a process in place that you can speak to will help you, especially with your conversation with Cognia or any interviews that you're going to have as far as your review and update. The last item, as I was watching the comments in the chat, also would be Dr. Thomas. Any comments on how you feel your things are going with this? Because this is even if another entity, even if it's GSBA, and we mentioned this, even if GSBA is working with you to do this review and update, it doesn't exclude what your involvement should look like. So you're going to still have to have involvement, clearly, from your administration, et cetera. So that goes without saying. That's why you hear the legal piece where it says that the governance team must promote policy development and that the board is a policy-making body, that you are responsible for adopting, revising, and following those written policies. So that's ongoing. So Dr. Thomas, any thoughts on where you think you are right now? And because it sounds as if a lot of time has been spent on moving forward with that.
Yes, so, I mean, we have made now significant progress. I met yesterday or day before, Ms. Tillman and Ms. Palmer and I, because we had had these conversations with you all about this policy service, and I needed to get some clarity as well on the modules offered through Assembly in comparison to the policy revision option, because I know there was some policy maintenance services and then there's a policy revision. So we met yesterday just to try to gain some clarity on what the options were. And at that time, I felt like that it was a good option, except now the issue is, or the challenge is, that we're trying to get as much of this addressed as possible prior to Cognia returning. And when we spoke yesterday, it was my understanding that it is about a 6-month process. It's also a $12,500 process, but bigger than the cost is the 6 months. And I recognize that the board is trying to get this done as expeditiously as possible. So, the challenge for us has been, it's just a lot going on. That's not complaining about us helping with policy. It's just that we're trying to make sure we help to do policy as effectively and efficiently as possible. But we're also still every hour of every day dealing with the challenge of a pandemic and how we support students virtually and how we get students back. And then we're trying to prepare for a Cognia return. I mean, it is a lot going on right now. And so that's the primary challenge for us. But again, at this point, I don't feel like we really have a choice, because a 6-month timeline is a long period of time. And no one has complained about it. It's just, I mean, it's mentally and physically taxing at a time that we are also stretched to try to do a lot of other things. That's not a complaint. It's just a reality. And I'm just working with our team just to try to help everyone balance that so we can get this work done, but not do it at the expense of other things that need to be done.
Okay, understood. The driving question will be that if you feel that your current process that you have tweaked, if it is allowing you to move in the direction of the bullets that are outlined on the document that's on the screen, as well as the directives that Cognia have provided for you. And so that's going to be the driving force for you going forward in all of this. And it sounds as if that's the direction in which you're headed. So Julie and I are
Who
not
is,
here to
No.
dictate that to you. Not at all.
So-
We're not here to dictate that to you.
but now you're making some really strong comments here. And again, if I'm looking at process, then I'm asking the question, who is monitoring that with us? And this is more to you, Dr. Thomas and Dr. Gant. Is someone, looking at our steps forward to that December date? And do we have any direction from Cognia about the urgency of this particular activity? Because if it is something that we can show demonstrate a plan and a progress moving forward, can we at least get to a place where we're prioritizing it so that, again, the critical work in the district is coming first? I know this is very critical for our district as well, but if it's a 6-month process from a professional group that does this, why are we trying to accomplish that in less time? Is my question. And then will we in the end have what we need in order to move forward? Because the thing that jumps out at me every time is this alignment to our strategic plan. And so, who is keeping check on the things that we're doing and making sure that they are still in alignment with our strategic plan? So that's where I live in the space.
Who's monitoring? I don't know how to answer that for you, Ms. Davis. I mean, in terms of ensuring that our policies are legal and sound, Attorney Pruitt is doing that work. When you say monitoring in alignment with the strategic plan, one of the things that Dr. Yeager has shared is that the plan has not been to make any marked change in the policies. It's just to revise, edit, update policies that now conflict with law, things that are redundant, things that are no longer needed for different reasons. So that was my understanding of the intent of this work now. So I don't know, when you say, you know, who's monitoring it in terms of alignment with strategic plan. Dr. Gant, maybe you can answer that better than I can.
No, I mean, the only comments that come to mind, I mean, I agree with Ms. Davis. If it's a 6-month process from people that do this I'm assuming every day, and us undertaking it in less time, and I don't think I hope this is not a surprise. I think I've shared this, and I think I've shared my views on this. So yeah, I agree with Ms. Davis. I will say though that I think, I don't know about the monitoring from a strategic plan, but I do know with Dr. Yeager, I do know she is sort of gone through the report and prioritizing based on some of the directives. So with some of the policies being old and outdated, and then if there were any that overlapped with any of our problem areas. We have had conversations about that. So I think that we could be comfortable in being able to, you know, ask at the end of our work or at some point in the future to give us a report, you know, from the policy committee, the number of policies we've updated, the number of older policies, you know, as Tish mentioned earlier, those that are over 10 years old, those that are over 20 years of age, and actually use that as some of the evidence for our cognitive report. I think we have pieces of it. My issue is with just efficiency as well as the slippery slope that I think is created when individual board members are working together collaboratively. The collaboration is great, but sometimes we unintentionally might be using power in a way that we're not even aware of. And then that may not come out to us, but it may come out as staff feels comfortable speaking with whoever, be it Dr. Thomas or Cognier or what have you.
Let me chime in here because I feel like I need to say this. This is a Herculean task that Dr. Yeager has taken on. And I don't want her to feel like that she's not being supported. I know she said something at maybe the last board meeting, maybe the work session. She's doing great work with this. And I don't want it to sound as though that Dr. Yeager is not doing a good job, because like I said, it's a Herculean task. And like Julie said a few minutes ago, you know, all of these meetings and et cetera, and working on doing all of this work, and you got other things to do. I mean, that's a whole bunch to take on and just actually be a part of this governing board. You know, I'm getting ready to go off the board in December, and I know that no way I was going to volunteer to take on something like that. So with Dr. Yeager, kudos to you, okay?
Thank you.
I agree. And I don't want you to think, Tish, that I'm picking on you, because this wasn't your undertaking. But you have done a great job from what I hear. And you are to be commended because you jumped in and you're a brand new board member. So kudos to you for doing that and doing all the other board work that you're doing, and working full time and probably raising a family. So that's why I just want to make sure going forward that y'all know that best practice is that you let the staff make the policies and present them to you, and you adopt them after you vet it and after you talk through it as a governing body. You still have input. That's all.
Can I just ask, I had asked it, sorry.
Mhm.
I asked this before, but your comment just made me think of it again. So again, staff is supposed to be the ones that are driving these policy updates, revisions, whatever. But are we supposed to like ask them to review them, or are they supposed to have a schedule that they follow? I guess I'm just wondering how they would know what they need to be reviewing when.
Now, boards can say, hey, I think we need a policy on, you know, blah, blah, blah. And if the board as a majority agrees, then the staff runs and goes and does it and brings it back to you. But they also, if they are keeping up with Georgia law, and I think y'all have our subscription service. So each month we send out, okay, you need to update your policy BH on this because of a new state law or because the DOE has changed something. So here's a sample policy. So y'all, the staff takes it, works with whomever, legal team, and then brings it to you because of this rule. We had to change this, and they'll tell you why. But
Yeah.
that's what flags when things have to be changed 90% of the time.
Well,
Sometimes you hear from the community, hey, I don't like this policy because of blah, blah, blah. Then you bring it to the board and you'll have a discussion about it. If you feel like y'all need to make changes to it, then you direct the staff to do that.
I was policy chair last year, and I felt like I agree with Greg. I think there's been a misunderstanding here because what you describe is essentially what we were doing. Where the problem we have is that successive boards over decades, and I guess not just boards, but district leadership just dropped the ball, and there didn't seem to be a process that was going on. And in fact, even last year, we had a plan that wasn't able to be followed through for revising some items, but there was no indication of the scope of the problem in terms of outdated policies. And so when we have that handed to us at the same time that we have a shot clock for the Cognia visit, and I had hoped that we would delay that visit because they did give us the out in the letter that we received, but we're going ahead with the original timeline. So with those kinds of pressures, I think it's perhaps understandable that we would just try to do what we've been doing, only at an accelerated pace. But
Absolutely,
anyway,
I understand that. Yes,
yeah.
and
So
you're put in a bad situation, and you probably inherited one too. We're just here to talk to you about best practice.
right, and so the other thing I'd like to say, because we're way over time on this item, is if at the end or afterward, if you could give your advice for how we could work smarter and what areas we should devote more time than others to, because I think sometimes we have these meetings, but then I'm not sure that we're actually following what you thought you told us or what you did say. So I would love to know, okay, in your opinion, the best practice from here, September 17th to early December, would be to focus more on this and less on that. If you could tell us, I think we're all ears.
Anything else before we move on to financial governance?
I do, but I'll put mine in writing. Thank you.
Okay. This one was rated the highest of all. The board approves guidance to the superintendent and sets sound fiscal policy so that the school system is an effective steward of all resources to support student achievement and organizational effectiveness. And you have a couple standards. Standard A, the Board of Ed, upon recommendation of the superintendent, adopts a budget that adheres to state law provisions and consistent with its strategic plan. And there are the elements. Standard B, the Board of Education adopts policy for sound fiscal management and monitors the implementation of the budget in accordance with state laws and regulations. You have all those elements. And again, y'all did a 5 and 5. 5 satisfactory, 5 needs improvements. It seems like the FY budget process was the most collaborative between the district and the board in several years. I would very much like a review of the budget that tells me more about individual budget items, because they feel like the current format is inscrutable. The link between the budget and the strategic plan should be a part of more conversations, especially for the finance committee, as well as the full board. More board discussion or participation in the annual financial audit could be helpful. The financial operations of the school system have been well managed for many years, even with the challenges of state cuts to education. And this person went on to cite that y'all got a really good deal on the rent to own for a very fair price of prime real estate to serve, to combine the central office operations.
The only
So,
item that I would add to that, Julie, would be urging the governance team to stay true to what they mentioned in reference to where you are with the revising and updating of the strategic plan, because with this one, of course, and you all mentioned it earlier, your budgets, of course, will also be aligned to what you say you value, which is your strategic plan. So that is one piece with this to consider. But that is something that you are addressing and you're moving in that
right.
direction with that one too. As far as, and that's for you as in terms of your self-assessment, a quick review from your cognitive report did not reference finance pieces here. So no, I don't see cognitive implications here with this one.
Further thoughts on this? I know that when we talked to y'all last September and we talked about the budget calendar, and a lot of districts, for instance, start in October, and you have several, meetings every other month, for instance. Have y'all developed a budget calendar to your liking? Do you feel good about the process? I know you have an interim superintendent, so it might be a different process than the last superintendent. But have y'all had discussions around it?
To my knowledge.
It seems like we adopted the budget this summer on schedule because we have a timeline that we have to meet. So yeah, absolutely. We had to meet the guidelines for the, the taxes and setting the millage limit and all that sort of stuff. We followed all those rules this summer, I think.
You're right, Dr. Yeager, and we were a little behind because of thing that had occurred, but we were able to get, Mr. Griner was able to get us caught up, and we were able to have those hearings and the meetings and actually pass the budget without a lot of difficulty, and even were able to include some increases in that this year. And I think now that we have Mr. Schooneman in that the official capacity of CFO, he will make sure that we are we adhere to that timeline that we have normally followed. Again, this year, we just had to make some adjustments.
I do remember when we talked about it in September, Julie, you talking about starting the budget process early, like in October for the following year. And I know that we had talked about that at that time. And then we had a leadership change, and then we had COVID and all of that stuff. So I do hope that we will start to have those conversations again, and maybe after we talk about the strategic plan next month, we can start talking about, how to work budget priorities and things like that, and a little earlier than in previous years.
And I think I'm the one who said something about the budget that we got to review was inscrutable. I mean, I'm brand new at this, but I found that giant binder with pages and pages and pages of numbers that I couldn't figure out how those were aligned to anything, except it was just unidentified person after person after person salary. And I couldn't even group them by schools to know how many people are at which schools. I just found it impossible to judge. I mean, everybody answered all my questions. There was no problem there, but it feels like there's got to be a better format. If I write a National Science Foundation proposal, I have to justify every expenditure, what it's going to be used for and why, and how it's going to address the objectives. The budget form that we have, I don't know if it's standard or if we do things differently, but it really felt very hard to be part of the process.
I've seen it several ways, and actually that binder before had by schools, everybody's expenditure and everything that they were doing, and we said that was too much. So the one that we got this year had less. We don't seem to be able to find that happy medium here. But what I do like about our budget process is that Byron is always on time. I don't care what else is going on crazy in the world, the budget piece gets in there on time. So thank you. You got a legacy to live up to.
Yep.
Any other thoughts?
I'm not saying it's not tenuous. It's a lot to go through, and you have to literally, I have to actually schedule myself time to do it, and I do it over several days. So yeah, it's tough.
I think to both of your points, I think if we start talking about the budget earlier, before all of that information is put into that budget format, then I think it won't be as difficult to figure out, and maybe not even as necessary to go line by line, because it will have been things that we've talked about and that we're aware of ahead of time.
Well, when you look at the financial situation of this school district compared to what it was, can't recall the exact number of years compared to what it was before the hiring of Larry Hamill. And then, of course, Chris Griner followed him, and now it's Byron Schumann. It was pitiful then, folks. And you all have heard me say this before, and I feel like this is important to say. And well, I won't call the name of the superintendent. We had to borrow money during the summer months to make payroll. So
Thank you for validating that, Mr. Worthy. I did tell that earlier.
I can tell you, we are in great shape. And also, when you look at the fund balance, and I keep a watchful eye on that all the time. I'm telling you now, it is great, because that business finance office before hiring of Larry Hammer, it was a total mess, folks. I'm telling you. And of course, let me say this, and I'll be quiet. Larry Hammer had a reputation, even after his first year here, getting clean audits from the state every year. And we're still getting clean audits. Thank you.
We'll keep him on board.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
oh boy.
All right, some quick takeaways for that would be what the items that we just heard. Of course, fund balance is important for the board for the reasons you just mentioned, in terms of going forward and having a healthy financial outlook. Remember that about 90% of your budget is going to be staff/personnel anyway. So when you think about getting bogged down in numbers and reports and all of that, just remember that 90% of that budget, that's rule of thumb. Yours may be a little bit different. Typically, it's 90% per staff and personnel reflects 90% of your overall budget. And so that the remainder is what you're looking at in terms of how you are aligning to your strategic plan programs and implementation and instruction and all the other things that you want to do. But it seems that you've moved in a good direction with that. So continue, and your budget and adjustment and delivering and utilization of the calendar will help you as you make those adjustments as well. So.
Dr. King, let me ask you something. I'm glad you brought that up, that in terms of the percentage of the budget, the 90% going toward personnel. And I wanted to bring this up because I can't recall what years, but when I was in graduate school and had school finance courses, I think I had about 10 or 15 hours of that. And it was always stated that if you put more than 74% of your budget in personnel, that's too much. But I'm happy to hear you make that comment on that, because that was years ago. So apparently, and you've been a superintendent, apparently that has changed.
Yes, what I was stating to you is what, as you look across in both nationally and within the state of Georgia, when you look at public school district budgets, the personnel piece represents typically around the 90%. Sometimes it's 85, but it's typically residing around 85 to 90 within that
Yeah,
range.
so apparently it's changed. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And do we want to hit governance structure? I know we spent a little bit of time on it last time.
Right, that's the last one. And the reason that it was last was because when we started the process before the self-assessment, the discussion around high-performing governance teams and governance structure, that's where the team started the discussion, even going, I think if we date back to January, February of the year.
Yeah.
So you've had a pretty deep dive with this particular domain, but we don't want to leave anything hanging out there in terms of items of importance to you, because the governance, this first domain, governance structure, has a heavy focus on roles and responsibilities, which is the role of the board. What's the role of the board? What's the role of the superintendent? Where are the blurred lines? And where do they both come together, where you have to support that work, which is what you've been talking about. So we did have those discussions, but we want to make sure that there are no other thoughts or questions on this, because you're going to have to continue with your work to get where you want to go with it. And I also would go back and mention too, we continuously mention the visit from Cognia in December. Remember, I can't speak for Cognia, but as we look at the report, they're not going to expect that you will have completed all of the information in terms of directives by the time they return in December. It's going to be, what are your plans that you've developed since the previous report? What have you done? What's your evidence? How much progress have you made? And what are your future short-term and long-term plans to relate to this? So just remember those things. I don't want you to rush things to the point that you reduce your effectiveness with it. However, you need to be able to speak to each one. And I think that's what we've said. So I want to make sure we're clear on that.
So what experience do you have, Dr. King or Julie, with other boards that have been in a similar situation? Did the boards and the districts undertake this work independently to try and run things and manage the reporting, the tracking, the developing of the plan, the monitoring of the plan, or did they bring in outside help to actually help implement that plan? I just want a sense of, you know, are we leaving an opportunity on the table to just have somebody that Dr. Thomas can throw the things over the shoulder to, and Dr. Gant can throw things over the shoulder to, that are singularly focused on getting us to and through the responsibilities we have to make the changes we need for our district to be strong and viable, and get rid of this, rating from Cognia, and get back onto a more stable course. Because still looking at our school performance results, that I know that we don't have any new updated ones, we weren't a strong district to begin with in terms of academic performance and meeting our strategic plan. We are in a pretty tough situation, and just to look at the update from 2019, we're not much better off. And so are we taking the right approach to even responding to this Cognia finding, or is there something else we need to do? Because again, my world is corporate, and in the corporate world, when it's your bread and butter, you don't leave that to chance. It's not somebody's other job. It becomes somebody's primary job to lead you through whatever that crisis is until you can get to a better place.
Typically when advanced ed, before it became Cognia, of course, typically they have gotten involved in this work with school districts as a result of board governance. In other words, the things that we're talking about now. And usually the things that we've seen across the state and beyond would center on the lack of alignment with the standards and elements that relate to governance structure, be it roles and responsibilities, be it micromanagement, or whatever that definition might be for that particular jurisdiction. And some of you mentioned boards being removed, boards being sanctioned, or boards being placed on, school districts being placed on probation or on notice. It has been because of the board governance issue. So to answer your question, because it was board governance, it was the responsibility of that board, along with their CEO, to work with some professional development entity, in many cases GSBA, because we've been in supporting districts as they've had that kind of intervention, to ensure that you're incorporating best practices to improve from a board governance standpoint. So I feel that based on that, you're doing that. You're beginning to do that. As far as other outside entities, I don't know that there are other outside entities that I would be recommending to you now based on your report, because your report does relate to the pieces that the board controls. Julie?
The only thing I would add is Sam's absolutely right, but the only thing that, if I would be asking my superintendent, if, since she is fairly new in her role, does she feel like she has the right people on board to help her get this done, because it really falls on the shoulder of the administrative team to do. And if she's understaffed, you want to make sure that she has the resources she needs to help get all these things done and all these things documented. So that would be my only other comment about bringing someone in. But typically, I think it's really handled by the staffs, and you know, GSBA has helped a lot of boards get through this for sure. And it really typically, like Sam says, it falls on the board and not knowing what their roles are. And that's when Cognia comes in.
Yeah.
Good times.
And I'd like to also, not to put Dr. Thomas on the spot, but I'd like to defer to Dr. Thomas as a current CEO and kind of get your take to the board on how you feel you are equipped to respond to these items that are in the report. And if you feel like you have begun to be able to document those things and have the support that you need, both from the board and the traction that you need with pulling your staff in. I know it's a different situation because of the pandemic. That just, you know, it's a challenge anyway, but with the pandemic, it just further exacerbates the whole issue. But I understand that. But I think it would be important if you would be willing to kind of give some thoughts on where you think you are.
You're still muted.
We have spoken some about this before, but we do have a staff person who has dedicated at least 2 full days a week. And he has the time now to do that because we're not doing as much assessment. And he is the individual who has led our charter renewal before. He's done our accreditation work in the past. So he's very comfortable with that process. And in working with advanced ed on accreditation. So he is working with us on that. He's going to start meeting with Dr. Gann and I every 2 weeks just to give an update, get information from her that's coming from the board, providing us with information that needs to go to the board. So I feel comfortable with that. I also feel like Cognia has done and is doing a good job of working with us to provide guidance and support. I received a call this week. I'm reaching out tomorrow to Dr. Schaefer, who will be the lead evaluator on our visit. And so I feel pretty comfortable with where we are. And to me, the bigger things right now are about board and board interaction. And when you look at the report and most of the directives, they are about our policy, they are about our meetings, our, you know, how we interact with each other, how we're interacting with the community. So many of those things are really things that we have to make a decision to do things differently. And that needs to be evident in how other people observe us and how we self-report. I mean, they're going to speak to us as a governing body and what we share and what others share about that work. So to me, I think our success in dealing with Cognia is going to be really heavily predicated on our willingness to do some self-reflection and then self-change, rather than it being things that are more operational in our work as a school district. And I hope that makes sense. You know, the majority of that report is not about our instruction or our performance or our budget or that kind of thing. The majority of the directives are related to how we work with each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And those are items that you,
right.
Yes.
You know, I don't know if someone else can come in and do that for us and guide us on that. That's really going to be about what they look at on videos and what they get in interviews. And, you know, if we do surveys, those types of things to me are more personal than had the report been more heavily weighted toward curriculum, instruction, operations, and finance.
Thank you for that.
Thank you both. That helps me and brings my comfort level up.
You're going in the right direction, sounds like. Sounds like you've got a good person to handle that.
Thanks.
So on the last time we met about domain one, about the governance roles, the notes that I took, that areas that needed work were building trust with each other, communicating consistently, finishing your norms, that y'all agree on the what and the why, but not on the how. And that's what you need to work on, and individuals working on themselves. I think that was a comment that one of the gentlemen made about, so this is what I need to work on. I'm going to commit to that and sharing that out with each other. So that's kind of where we left off of that. And I don't know, I know we're past time, which I don't mind going late, but it's y'all's call on if you want to continue to talk about this domain or next steps.
Is everyone okay with continuing, since this is our last one, continuing to talk about this domain and bringing this conversation to a close so that we can build next steps and goals?
If we can put a time limit on it, Keisha. I mean, I've been sitting at this chair, and you know that too, because you
Yeah,
had
I'm clear on that domain.
4:30. So now it's 9:30. So I don't know. I mean,
You're
I'm
brain
old.
dead.
Yeah. So
We're
anyway,
brain
if we
dead.
put a time limit on it, I don't want to be a party pooper or anything. I'm just speaking the truth.
And I don't want to come back and visit it again. So if we can make it very, very succinct, I'd be happy. And I'll promise not to ask any questions.
I think we talked a lot about it the last time we met too,
did.
and kind of ended the meeting on that. And I guess I wonder if maybe Dr. King and Dr. Rame could give us some suggestions versus us sort of rehashing things that we've already rehashed a bunch of times. Maybe if we can have them kind of, like John mentioned in the chat, like how should we best spend our time to move this part forward? That would be helpful.
So maybe let's spend no more than 15 minutes with the goal of being done at 9:30.
That works for me. How about y'all?
Okay.
Okay. Well,
I'm
I'll
in.
begin. Great. I'll begin by saying that I think the major piece here is that you have begun to address the norms, the development of the norms. There were certain categories that you were identifying, and I would say that the major pieces that you continue that. Of course, you won't do that tonight, but I think that with the times that you have slotted for meetings going forward, to devote some time to pinpointing the categories for norms and continuing that work, I think would really help complete your work on this domain. But also remember, when I say complete your work, it's an ongoing thing. You continue this, self-assess, you continue to look at how you're doing with that. So those are my thoughts.
I agree with Sam. I think the first thing I would do is finish those norms, because that's going to be the driving factor for all this. And I think we've got a couple extra dates to help you with that so that we can get those done before the cognitive visit, if possible. I would also spend some time on team building and relationship building and building
Yes.
trust with each other, which we can help you with. And it, because if you don't have mutual respect and you don't have trust with each other, you're not going to get very far. And that is the most important thing that y'all need to do in order to come together as a governance team to improve student achievement. And, some of the other trainings I think we've got lined up before they come is talking about high performance governance teams and superintendent evaluation. And Dr. Gant, you'll have to help me out. I can't remember what else was on your calendar, but we wanted to finish this evaluation to determine how y'all felt about the priorities moving forward and the time that you're going to be spending with your monthly trainings. So that's where we want your input based on the fact that we finished this.
Julie, you on the same brain wave with me. You mentioned team building, and I spoke with Dr. Thomas one day this week. I can't recall what week about that. course, pertaining to the cognitive report and also the governing board. Some things I used to do with my faculty that really worked. And she said she's going to put that on the agenda for the next work session. So I'm happy to hear you say that, because team building is important.
And sadly, it's just really hard to do right now virtually, so.
Yeah. Well, the way I plan to do it, I think it's going to work.
Awesome.
Probably dangerous for council to speak up, but let me just interject. Since, I work and other lawyers in my firm work with multiple districts, there's no one size fits all for how boards and their superintendent work together. And I got to say, from my years of, as I've told you before, I started with Clark County School District back in 1996 when I started working with Mr. Benton. I see y'all virtual or not. I think you've made leaps and bounds. The bottom line is figuring out how you want to work together with each other and with the superintendent. And I haven't heard as much honest and open and cooperative discussion in my whole tenure as I've heard in the last couple of months. So I don't think you have to do it some specific way that any consultant or inspector tells you to. You have to just make it work for the kids. And I think you're really making strides.
Mike, I appreciate you saying that, because I'll be honest, I'm very discouraged. Because even with working with this policy, through these policies and, with Tish and all the work that she's laid out, she has done an excellent job, and I see us working well together, in that facet. I don't want to do any team building. I want us to get to the business at hand, because it's about individuals. It's a lot deeper than the school board, if we want to be honest about it. It's some community mess. And I want us to focus on the kids. And in terms of the policy, I just wish that before we undertook all this work, because I know that lately, because of my work, because of me working with children in this district in my nonprofit, I've been like, no, I can't meet this day, I can't meet this day, because we meet a whole lot, for a board. I try to do all that I can, but I just felt discouraged. I know, I understand everything that Julie said, but I just wish that a lot of this had come out sooner, because I just feel like my time, not being selfish, but I value my time, because I like to spend my time on the ground with kids. And so I'm in a lot of training, so I have to switch a lot of stuff around, because I'm committed to doing what I can for this. And I just want, from Dr. Thomas to Dr. Gant, all the way down, just be like straightforward, about what it is that we need to be done, and truly direct this process and drive this process. And I know that we want to sometimes be diplomatic, and we don't, because we got these issues, of working together, we want to step on toes, but it's at this point, like, I want to hear like the straight shooter. This is what we need to do. As a superintendent, I'm just making up an example. These policies and doing it this way, it is a bit much for my staff right now. I think it would be better if we, go ahead and let GBSA help us, and then we work together to, review those policies. But I just feel like it's a lot of double talk. And I just want us to be straightforward so that we can do the best that we can. I feel very discouraged, but I will shake it off, get back up in the morning and, and try again. But I'm glad Mike said that, because I guess I just definitely don't know what a board role is, because I came in because I felt like in the past, the boards were rubber stampers, because a lot of stuff that they did, they didn't ask questions, they just went along with it. We've had 3 CFOs in the last 3 years, I think, maybe 4, but there's a lot of stuff we don't talk about, because that's not anybody else's fault. It's not the board's fault. So we get blamed for a lot of stuff, and I just want us to start being more straightforward. So I'm sorry.
No, that's great. Let me tell you 2 words that are totally unhelpful to any conversation: micromanagement and rubber stamp, because they're nothing but pejorative labels
That's right.
that people sling at each other.
Said it before.
So straight talk, the quicker y'all get past this navel gazing and start talking about your common interest in running the school district for the good being of the children, the better off you'll be. And the way you'll get there is by everybody coming to grips with they're not needing to die on every hill. Sometimes, there's give and take, and that's how you run this place. And that's all there is to it.
Can I make a comment? Speaking of being straightforward, and I want to be as transparent as I possibly can. I think that, on the one hand, we say be straightforward. On the other hand, and I say we because I do this as well. But when someone says something, then we take offense and take it personally. So, for instance, when we talk about policy or whatever, we eventually have to decide as a board and the superintendent the process we're going to use. We're using a process right now. Opinions have been shared. Okay, when we talk about regulations, that was shared last year. The thoughts around regulations. When we talk about policy committees, that was shared during our very first retreat. When I made the recommendation or shared my thoughts about where we are with policy, I've shared that. I've spoken with Dr. Yeager about that. I also put that in my president's report. And so I do hear, and I will admit I am feeling a little defensive, but at some point as a board, we have a list of things that we've made progress on, a list of things, but we also have to be willing to understand that not all of these issues, or at least the directives or the problems that Cognia has found, it doesn't define us, but they are issues that an outside entity found, and we have to take ownership for some of that. These directives, everything can't necessarily be attributed to history or what's been placed in our lap or someone else. And so as an individual person and as an individual governing body, we have to be willing, we can say, yes, be honest, but we also have to be willing to accept the person's honest opinion about that and not take it as personally. I mean, take it personally for a little while, but then get back to the work. And so I hear you, Dr. Maddox, but I also think that we have to look at the environment and the culture we set that make it less conducive for someone to be straightforward, and less conducive for someone to say that's a problem that needs to change so that we can be a stronger team.
And if I can chime in, I think the way that that's most effectively done is when we pick up the phone and talk to each other. And Charles and I talked last week. I feel like that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that Dr. Thomas, when I have a question and I text her, I said, can you call me when you have a chance? I feel like that she is receptive to that. I don't think it has to be an email. I think that we do too much in email. And what happens is that we're all weighing in when there's not everyone's question. And so I do that with Lakeisha. And I think we all do that. I'm not saying I'm the only one, but I think that email, we have emailed ourselves to death. Now we've gotten a lot better over the last few months. But if you look at our emails going back, a year ago, 8 months ago, man, it was like rat-tat-tat-tat. And so we need to call each other more. We need to ask each other questions when we have them. And
Any other thoughts on? I would agree with Mike. I haven't known y'all as long, but I have watched your board meetings from over a year ago, and I've watched them recently, and you have made a lot of progress. Maybe not behind the scenes as much as we want, based on some of the comments, But Dr. Gant's right. The culture of the district is set at the top and is set by y'all. And if you want your superintendent to feel comfortable telling you the truth, you need to let her tell the truth and take it. My superintendent is the one who taught me the best on how to be a school board member because I didn't know what I was getting into. And she would push back when I would step over my line. But I trusted her. We all trusted her. We had mutual respect for each other. And if you trust your staff and you feel like you've got the right people on the bus, then let her do her work and let her be able to tell you no sometimes. Because sometimes that's what it takes, because you don't want to go in different directions. You want to make sure that you're working that plan, which I know you're working that plan because it's coming out soon. And you'll have more direction when that gets approved. So I appreciate those comments though. And we haven't heard from Dr. Thomas, and I'm going to put her on the spot again, see how she feels about what's been said.
Billy, did you say you were putting me on the spot or you weren't?
I am. We haven't heard from you, and
I
about
just spoke extensively about how this work really is about us. It's not about, I mean, we have a lot of work to do in terms of academics and achievement, but I just spoke about most of this cognitive work is about us as individuals. Mr. Davis is right. He will shoot me a text and usually I pick up the phone within minutes unless I'm in a Zoom and I call him right back. And many of the other board members will do that. And I appreciate that. I don't mind that, when we go back to the policy work, I don't think any of us, including Dr. Yeager, had any idea how much work it would be until you get in it. And then many of us, and I won't speak for anyone but myself, a lot of times you don't know the resources and what's out there to help you. So you all were talking about this policy revision, but there are like 5 different arms of that, right? So you have policy modules, you have the maintenance service, then you have this totally revision service. And while I learned some good information yesterday, I'm also still trying to run a school district. So I'm having webinars with this person and I'm meeting with this person. And I met with Charlie and I met with the other lady yesterday. But in the midst of that, we're trying to get kids back in school. We've got 2,500 people angry about virtual learning. And so a lot of this needs to be done, but you're balancing a lot of plates. And so, I get it. And I get what Dr. Maddox is saying about tell people, but sometimes you don't know how deep the water is until you step off in it and realize there's nothing under you. And I think that's how some of this work has been. You think, oh, this is shallow, and you step right there and all of a sudden there's no footing underneath. And that's how a lot of this work feels constantly. And I hate to keep going back to this pandemic, but for school leaders, and I would think even for board members, you used to be able to go to bed, wake up, and know kind of what you're doing tomorrow with a little tweaking on what that looked like. And you could just modify and you could be, just make a few changes. But now everything you do is new. Everything you try to create is new. And I think we're trying to fix world problems that are being dumped on the district's lap, whether that's how we all of a sudden get internet all across a county or a city or a state, that no one has been able to do that even for profit reasons. So we're dealing with so much. So I'm frustrated too. I mean, I get it how Dr. Maddox feels. I'm frustrated, but it's not because of anyone. It's a lot of things that have us at this place. So I think Dr. Gant's right. We do have to be willing to extend each other grace. We have to be willing to accept differences of opinions and know that we're not going to always agree. And we have to be able to have some give and take. So there you go.
I don't want you, I'm sorry if you feel offended, but I'm at a place of feeling desperate that, something truly, has to change, and not blaming. And I do take responsibility for whatever role I played, but at the same time, as I stated before, I recognize the whole picture. And so I can't just talk about one part without the other part. And I think that that's something that we do a lot within this board is we don't want to talk about the whole story. We want to talk about this piece of the puzzle, but it's not one piece of the puzzle. But I appreciate, Dr. Gant, and she's done a great job as a chair. And I definitely, respect Dr. Thomas. She's easy. If I have an issue, I do. I call her, I pick up the phone. I try to do all those right things, but I just don't want us to feel like we are one size fit all, and that's it. And I'm just trying to find my way, and it's hard. I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing as a board member. I don't know.
Right. Well, you got to remember you're still young as a board member. You're brand new, so it's a huge learning curve. It takes a full term to understand really what your role is. Sometimes it's a lot.
Dr. Knox?
Thank you very much. Just to get to next steps, because I think we're out of time again.
Yeah.
I had asked a question in the chat and Dr. Gant had responded. And so I wanted Dr. Rame's opinion, because I really think I'm just a practical person on this. I want to know where our time, because we've all talked about how we have limited time here. Where should our time be invested? Because I felt like with the last two meetings, I've heard Dr. Rames say that the norms, that's really a place to put our time or some chunk of time. But if I'm reading, and I'll let Dr. Gantz say it, if I'm reading Dr. Gantz's comment, is that meetings were inefficient, that dealing with the norms. And so I just wanted to, I just want a way forward. What are we supposed to be doing? How can we reallocate our time and make the most of this?
And so in conversations with Dr. Gant about the upcoming schedule, and the fact of the matter is that the norms aren't going as quickly as you want. Typically what we do is we sit down with the board, and it usually takes a couple of times, and we knock them out. And you just go through, you prioritize the norms that you want. I know you've already adopted some, which is great.
Yeah.
But I think that the norms are going to get to what's going to make y'all a better governance team and how you treat each other. And that's the main thing that Cogni is concerned about from this report. So that's what I would prioritize. Sam, do you have other thoughts on that?
I mean, if you think back, that's what I said a while back.
Yeah.
That the major piece from the domain number one would be to continue to work on your norms. Remember, you had multiple categories around which you could have decided to develop norms. You don't have to choose 100% of those. You choose the categories that relate to where you are currently. So, and you had begun to do that. So that is a major focus that you should continue between now and your visit with Cognia. And of course, you continue that beyond as well. So I still think that's important.
What do you think number two is, if norms are number one?
I do think number two is to continue to tweak your process for revising and updating your policy process.
Okay.
Because when we talked about that, you all have a program in place. And I agree and respect what your counsel Pruitt has said, that he feels that he is involved appropriately with that. You all need to continue to do that, from ensuring that it's aligned with your legal aspects as well as updating. But that's a long process. So those two things are two major pieces of norms, and continuing the policy piece. Now you're going to have to determine how much you feel you can get done between now and December. Remember, what I suggested earlier is that it's not designed for you to say that you're going to be able to be finished by December. I don't think even Cogni is going to expect that you're going to be finished with all of the body of work around these directives, but they're going to want to know that you have begun the process and your plans for continuing.
Okay.
All right. Other thoughts, comments?
Outside of that, I'll just mention this because I know that this team has been together for multiple hours this evening, and it's only so much you can do and continue to be effective with that amount of time. But if you would allow us to take some time to maybe schedule some time with for reflection with your superintendent, Dr. Thomas, and your board leadership, board chair, maybe vice chair, to just, and reflection just means that we won't be making decisions for you, but just to go back and take a look at what you have accomplished thus far in some of these trainings and vet it against what we just said, and then look at what you already have scheduled to determine what topics you may need next. And then that will allow Dr. Thomas and your board chair to come back to you to say, here's what we think, and to give you some feedback on it. That might be the most efficient way to consider the next step on this.
Yeah, we're scheduled to talk on Monday afternoon, and I'll send that a Zoom. So then you can present that to the board and go forward. And we just really want to thank you for your time and your hard work. Y'all are working really hard, and y'all are making improvements. I've seen it. Sam's seen it. And don't get discouraged. Just keep going forward. And we at GSBA want to really thank you for naming your new board room after Vernon Payne. We miss him too, and no one better than Mr. Payne. We appreciate all he's done to help students for all those many years. So kudos to you guys for doing that. See, you did something really good just recently.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rame and Dr. King, for your time, and want to thank all of our board colleagues and council and board-elect and Dr. Thomas as well. We'll share information from the Monday meeting. We're at the place in the agenda for adjournment. If there are no other questions or comments.
I move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Worthy. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, seeing no objections. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned at 9:38 p.m. Thank you.